Okay. Um, I am going to attempt to do an analysis and review on Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. And just as a disclaimer, there are probably better, more qualified people to do this sort of analysis. But I thought it would be a fun thing to do, and I'm more so just doing it because it's fun and I want to do it for myself. Um, so I have a lot of notes here. I wish I would have emailed myself the link for this book, but there was an interesting book, I think probably written in 1920, about analyzing fiction, and the author had this really uh, great take that you can really never truly analyze a book the same way that you can analyze other mediums, um, because the moment you finish a sentence, a paragraph, a page, and you're moving on into this sort of a narrative, the the image that was created, the ideas that were formed in your mind at the time of reading what you've just read are fading away and becoming something else, something of a reconstructed memory. And I mean, you could say this for a lot of other things. You know, film. Once a scene is over, once a moment is over, and you're moving on and ingesting the next portion of the thing, you are suddenly experiencing the loss of the thing that you just saw, and your mind is sort of categorizing it and reframing it into your memory. Um, this is sort of you can see this in life itself. Um, in a in a sort of a moment of ecstasy or danger or something like that, five different people will have five different answers for what happened in that span of time. Um, I guess you could say less so for visual art. You can look at something, especially more simple visual art. You can look at something and analyze it more holistically. But if you have, let's say, a large mural or a very large piece or a series of things, it's going to be harder for you to truly analyze the thing holistically, meaningfully, because you sort of have to focus on one little thing at a time. And this is sort of a challenge for, I think, artists doing large pieces themselves, is that they're sort of stringing along ideas based on what they remember themselves doing a moment ago, or they have to sort of scrub over and look at something that they just did in order to fit in ideologically the thing that they're moving on to and focusing on next. So it's very interesting. But I have taken some notes here. I'm going to do the best that I can to give you my thoughts on what this story is, how it relates to our culture, um, and some interesting points about it. So it was written by Ernest Cline in, let me see, when was it written? Ready Player One. When was it written? It was written in 2011, so about 14 years ago. Okay, and he's sort of the whole book. It's a fun adventure story, sort of sci-fi dystopian, set in the future, and it's easy to read. His prose or whatever, his style of writing is very simple, easy to read. Obviously, sort of meant for a mass audience. The way he writes is similar to, if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, similar to the way that many adventures are described, many scenes are described by a dungeon master. You can tell that he plays D&D, and in fact, it comes up quite a bit in the story. It's a central theme, or there's a certain, it plays a large role in the narrative, Dungeons and Dragons, and you could tell that he did that as a teenager, right? The author, Ernest Cline, must have played D&D as a teenager, and it was a large part of his life and his social life and growing up. And his whole style of writing is something that you would see in a a Dungeons and Dragons module, something that a dungeon master would write in order to describe a scene. You're walking into a a tomb, that's darkly lit, and there's braziers on either side, and you smell mold, and all these little things. It's essentially just the simplest way that you can describe a scene so that the person can get the information and have a nice rounded view of the scene, without too much fluff, without too many extraneous details. So I guess I'll start off with the beginning here. My first note is on page 12, and this is from I believe an archive.com or some PDF I found online. So let me see if I can pull that up here. Ready Player One PDF. So this isn't going to be maybe perfectly one-to-one with the paperback or whatever, but this is the page number from the PDF. Right. So here we'll go down here. First, I'll read the opening paragraph here, because I think that's really important for a book, how it opens, first impressions and everything. It's going to essentially give you a taste, an impact, and leading you into the story. The door is opening, and suddenly you're in this world. And so I think the initial paragraph is very important, the first sentence even. So here is the first paragraph of Ready Player One. Everyone my age remembers where they were and what they were doing when they first heard about the contest. I was sitting in my hideout watching cartoons when the news bulletin broke in on my video feed announcing that James Halliday had died during the night. Okay, so there you go. There's it's very central to the whole book. The whole book is going to be about this contest that he mentions in the first sentence. James Halliday is a central character that is a huge part of the narrative, and essentially creates the backdrop for the adventure, creates the quest that the players are going to be going on, much like a dungeon master would, could create a quest for his players to go on. Everyone my age remembers where they were and what they were doing when they first heard about the contest, right? So the contest is a big central. It is the prime motivator for the protagonist. It is essentially what the story is about. It's about this contest, and or at least that's what they're doing. That's what the characters are doing, and they're also, growing and learning about adulthood and finding themselves. Right. It's also sort of a what do you call it? A passage of adulthood story, becoming a man, finding love, what is love, making friends, and what does friendship mean, and all these things that you would find in a young adult novel, right? So I'll go down to page 12 here and see what we can. Okay. So page 12, Halliday, one of the world's richest people. So there's this guy Halliday, and he creates this virtual reality system, right? You can put on the headset and the gloves and enter into this virtual reality. And essentially, it's this big holistic universe where people can lose themselves in escapism or go to school. You know, the main character actually attends virtual school, high school, in this virtual reality system called Oasis, right? And even the word, even the name Oasis is sort of giving you, describing what the thing is, right? There's some quote in the book where it's a theme, in the book where video games are an escape. Halliday is constantly talking about how video games were an escape for him from real life, which was crushing and depressing and not what not what a child would expect or what they wanted out of life. The real world was full of mean people and adversity and abusive parents and all this stuff. Whereas video games sort of afforded this this escape into another realm where you could be the hero, where you could be powerful, where you could do whatever you want. So he essentially becomes one of the world's richest people by creating this Oasis virtual reality world and technology. And my first note is he's one of the world's richest people, has enough gold to make a large house out of gold, but decides to make a video game contest instead of helping people in this dystopian hell world. So this question is sort of answered, and it's played around with in the novel. He's not just he's creating this game, right? He's got hundreds of billions of dollars. The world has slipped into this really horrible state. I mean, the descriptions of the world are very. It's a technocratic dystopian hell world, where everybody is. Most of the people in the world are completely impoverished and living, hand to mouth. Nobody has jobs. Even fast food jobs have a line, a waiting list years long. You can't find a job, and people are living in these stacks of trailers, right? These like, instead of having trailer parks where everything is horizontally laid out, they've stacked up these trailers in these sort of structures, these like skyscraper-like structures, and people are living on top of each other, which I will talk about in a second. So he's one of the world's richest people, has enough gold to make a large house out of, but decides to make a video game contest instead of helping people. This is something that kind of struck me in the beginning of the novel, that he has hundreds of billions of dollars, and there's so many things that he could do with his wealth to create programs and help people, and help bring the world out of this gut-wrenching dystopia. But it seems like, reading through the novel, he doesn't have the answers. How does he do that? And there is sort of an argument between two of the main characters. One of them wants to use the wealth, wants to find this this Easter egg within the Oasis program that will win them this contest and get them all of Halliday's money. And one of the main characters wants to use that money to help the world and help feed people and bring people out of poverty and save people's lives. And the other character, the main character, doesn't see the point in this, doesn't know how to fix the world, and therefore just wants to essentially build a spaceship and restart life on another planet, an Earth-like planet, which, in my mind would just continue the problem. I mean, there's this idea, I remember in The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, that humanity had reached a point of nuclear war and just this utter collapse of social fabric and morality. And so humanity ventured forth into space and went to Mars and started populating Mars, and essentially eradicated the Martian population and just brought all of the problems of humanity along with them, right? Like the problems that we see in this world, the massive collapse of social structures, of culture, of morality, all these things aren't going to be solved by just moving somewhere, right? We bring the problems with us because the problems are in our hearts and our minds, and we create the problems, right? So I should also say, starting off here, that I'm going to be pretty much ambivalent to spoilers. So, spoiler alert, this is an analysis. And so I'm going to be giving away a lot of what's going to happen in the book. So, if that's a problem, if you haven't read the book, if you care about spoilers, you might want to read the book first and come back to this, or just watch another video or something. So, page 22, this is kind of interesting. The protag describes his disbelief in God, and the author sort of front loads the novel with a lot of climate change propaganda and his ideas about climate change and religion. The protag's parents died. He's sleeping in a corner of the laundry room, hiding from his horrible aunt. 15 people live in his aunt's trailer, and you can sort of see, you can understand, I suppose, why the protagonist would have a disbelief in God. Living in this horrible state, being abused by his aunt and her boyfriend, living in this dystopian hell world. It would be crushing, mentally crushing, spiritually crushing, and it would be very difficult to have a belief in anything. Let me see if I can find it here on page 22. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the author sort of front loads the novel with his spiritual ideology, and you can tell he's sort of speaking from this is this is sort of autobiographical in a way, and you can tell the author is putting himself into this protagonist and sort of giving his view of the world, which is, in my opinion, pretty inconsistent and vapid. Um, and I didn't appreciate it really reading it. It was sort of almost a stumbling block in the beginning of the novel that was hard for me to get over. But generally, I will say this right off the rip, that I liked the book. I thought it was fun. It was engaging. I didn't want to stop reading it. I read it, from front to back fairly quickly. It was easy to read, and it played with a lot of themes and ideas that I really enjoyed. But with this first, with these pages here that I'll read for you, you can tell that the author, is sort of typical of a lot of these, I'm a dork, I'm a nerd, I love fantasy, I love sci-fi, I love playing D&D, but I find in this subculture that it is very prevalent that people just don't really have a spiritual intuition, or if they do, they sort of meander into a lot of Eastern spirituality, while throwing away a lot of the Western religious systems that really made civilization great and thrive, and made it cohesive, made it possible for people to live in peace for most of humanity, most of their existence, right? Like, most people don't have to fight in war. Most people aren't, in a civil war for resources. At least in Western civilization, we live quite comfortable lives, peaceful lives. Neighbors help each other, and as you see the religiosity, the spiritual fabric of the West decline and degrade, this peace is eroding. You know, we have riots and violence in the streets and political ideologies clashing, neighbors not helping each other as much, you know, not stopping on the side of the road to help somebody. These things are slowly disappearing, and these sort of atheists, you know, or so-called atheists. I don't even really believe that atheists really exist. I think they're kidding themselves personally, and I'm not trying to anger anybody with this idea. It's just my personal belief that they still hold on to these Western ideas of spirituality, because like charity and mercy and forgiveness and love, you know, for one's neighbor. They like those rules because it makes society possible. It makes peaceful and loving, cohesive society possible. But at the same time, they will very, you know, very nastily, you know, criticize the Western religion, primarily Christianity, and sort of treat it as if it is infantile, you know, and compare it to data sets and their own sort of lens of viewing scientific data and what the scientific data tells us about the story of humanity and meaning. So it's sort of a contradiction, right? A spiritual contradiction in a lot of these people's heads. They maybe have not, you know, in depth looked at these ancient texts, at the actual, what are they telling us? What are the ancient church fathers telling us? What is the underlying theme here? And how does it fit into the way we live, the way that and the meaning or the purpose of human life? I think that we have been sort of sold a straw man, you know, especially in the last 40, 50 years, by the scientific intelligentsia, who has paid more attention, and it's probably a matter of intellectual capital, you know, that they are spending more time looking at data and scientific data and all this stuff, and not really delving into philosophy and the rules of logic and all these things, and the roots of Western spirituality. Um, you know, it's they create this straw man, and you can see this here in this on page 22. Excuse me. So, here's a quote. I don't know, maybe your experience differed from mine. For me, growing up as a human being on the planet Earth in the 21st century was a real kick in the teeth, existentially speaking. The worst thing about being a kid was no one told me the truth about my situation. In fact, they did the exact opposite, and of course, I believed them because I was just a kid and I didn't know any better. I mean, Christ, my brain hadn't even grown to full size yet, so how could I be expected to know when the adults were bullshitting me? So I swallowed all the Dark Ages nonsense they fed me. Some time passed, I grew up a little, and I gradually began to figure out that pretty much everyone had been lying to me about pretty much everything since the moment I emerged from my mother's womb. This was an alarming revelation. It gave me trust issues later in life. I started to figure out the ugly truth as soon as I begun to explore the free Oasis libraries. The facts were right there waiting for me, hidden in old books written by people who weren't afraid to be honest, artists and scientists and philosophers and poets, many of them long dead. As I read the words they'd left behind, I finally began to get a grip on the situation, my situation, our situation, what most people referred to as the human condition. It was not good news. I wish someone had just told me the truth right up front. As soon as I was old enough to understand it, I wish someone had just said, here's the deal, Wade, you're something called a human being. That's a really smart kind of animal. Like every other animal on this planet, we're descended from a single-celled organism that lived millions of years ago. This happened by a process called evolution, and you'll learn more about it later. But trust me, that's really how we all got here. There's proof of it everywhere buried in the rocks. That story you heard about how we're all created by a super powerful dude named God who lives in the sky. Total bullshit. The whole God thing is actually an ancient fairy tale that people have been telling one another for thousands of years. We made it all up like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. So you can see he's just like basically disdainful of you know of Christianity, of the idea that there could be a God or a creator, an all-loving being that created us, in that um, and he even calls it a fairy tale, like the Easter Bunny, right? And you hear this, that you hear these sort of vapid arguments from a lot of atheists, from a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of people in this nerdy subculture. They have complete disdain and distrust. Um, and it's understandable towards the institutions. The institutions are made out of human beings, and human beings are imperfect and fallible, and they do bad things. But I think it's really throwing aside the deeper analysis of the religion itself, of Christianity, a deeper analysis of the logic of it, the cohesiveness of it, and sort of throwing it to the side and and giving some sort of explanation for existence and creation that really, when you pin it down and put it under a microscope, has uh, much less probability than actually just a god creating everything ex nihilo out of nothing. Um, everything evolving out of a single-celled organism, for instance. Um, there's really no uh, there's really no concrete proof that that even happened. We're sort of extrapolating this story out of a snapshot of reality that we have access to, looking at sets of data and ascribing a meaning to it based off of our own philosophical values, and creating a story, right? That may not be true. It's basically based off of axioms, just like a belief in God is based off of axioms, based off of assumptions, right? Assumptions about how the world is and how the world works. And so I thought that this was a little bit short-sighted, and the story wouldn't have suffered if you would have just left this out. But at the same time, we're looking at this from the point of view of the character. You can't necessarily blame the author for putting this in, because it's but because he's describing the ideas of the character and what he's believing and what he's going through, and it's not, you know it's understandable that he would see this, that he would view the world this way, um, with the access that he has, with in the environment that he's in. This is a pretty realistic capture of what a modern sort of geeky dude thinks about reality. So as a character analysis, it is cohesive, but I don't appreciate the that viewpoint as a person myself, who a thinking human being who has ideas of reality. So I'm going to try and get through this a little bit faster. So on page 26, he describes how after the energy crisis made rural people flood into the cities, which I don't believe would happen. It would be the opposite. It kind of shows how backwards people that have lived in the city all their lives kind of think, as if rural people aren't way more capable at surviving. Um, so he describes how the world is going through this energy crisis, right? And once civilization essentially collapsed, all of the people from the countryside flooded into the cities for resources. This is, I think, really short-sighted. It's coming from a point of view where it's coming from the point of view of somebody who's lived in a city all their lives, and doesn't really have much experience with rural culture. People who live in the country are survivalists. They know how to survive in the woods. They're quite comfortable surviving with very little resources. And so I think the idea that uh, everybody from the countryside would flood into the cities, with their hands out looking for resources, is quite short-sighted. I think it would actually be the opposite. The And I think you can see this in other civilizational catastrophes, such as the Soviet Union, where when everything collapsed and there was an energy crisis, a food crisis, a job crisis, the people in the countryside were fine. You know, they did not suffer greatly from the collapse of the institutions in the cities. It was the cities, right, that really suffered and ran out of resources because they rely on the countryside in order to feed them, right? In the countryside, you have the farms, you have the gathering of resources and the processing of them, which are then shipped into the cities to feed this sort of dependent population. Right. The people living in the large cities don't know how to survive. They don't know how to grow their own food. They don't know how to process their own food. They are completely alienated from nature, from their own nature, and from the process of survival and what it takes to survive on this planet without the city, right? The city is this sort of filter. It's this congregation of people which has really weakened the fabric of humanity in many ways and sort of allowed us to create these obscured lenses with which we view the world. So I think this is a little bit short-sighted on the author's side, where he's describing the collapse of civilization and then the rural people coming into the cities. Right, like it was the other way around. It's always been historically the other way around. People aren't flooding into the city, right? It's people from the city end up flooding out into the countryside and essentially strong arming the rural population into feeding them if they can. So completely backwards. Um, so these trailer stacks are a great visual, even though they would never happen. Really, it just seems like a completely um, a ridiculous sort of system. You know, why would you just stack trailers on top of each other? I don't think people would concentrate in this sort of scenario into the cities. I think things would spread out a lot more across the countryside. People would be looking for resources where they could be grown, you know, outside of the cities, and things would actually spread out instead of piling up in one location. The amount of resources needed to haphazardly keep all of these operating would not be worth it. People would spread out into the wilderness, the cities would die out, and those who could not survive would too. So on page 29, Wade runs into his neighbor, Mrs. Gilmore. We don't spend a lot of time with Mrs. Gilmore, unfortunately, but he does describe her as the nicest person he's ever met, the only person who's really treated him with any kindness. Um, and of course, Mrs. Gilmore is a Christian, right? So it's like, on one hand, you know, the author is completely, I should say, the protagonist is completely lambasting a belief in God, a belief in Christianity. But on the other hand, the only person, ironically, who's ever treated him with any kindness is this Christian lady, right? So, sort of almost contradictory there, or maybe the author is telling us something that there's not. It's not completely bereft of meaning, of purpose. You know, Christianity, Western religiosity. That there is something there. There's a, and it brings something good to the table. You know, the one person who seems to believe in God in the whole narrative is the only person that he has ever found any kindness from, and she offers him breakfast. She offers to feed him, you know, when he's on his way to his little hideout. Um, so Wade likens Mrs. Gilmore's religiosity to a fantasy that keeps her going, but admits that his obsession with video games is the same thing. Ironically, she seems to be the only person who treats him well at this point in the story. What would be the point of going on in all this hell, creating a fantasy to get you by if you just believe that nothing happens after death? Wouldn't that be preferable? Wouldn't death be preferable in this hellscape, you know? And so it does, we do kind of deal with this question throughout the book, you know, this this idea that the escapism into the video games is not enough, for happiness. That Wade craves real social interaction, real human beings, to touch and feel real people and talk to them and see through his real eyes, the real world. And that this escapism into this virtual world is actually sort of a prison, a sort of a hell in itself, a self-isolating prison. So yeah, and it's this it just brings up this idea in my mind that you know if you truly believe, this is why I don't believe that atheists really exist. If atheists, if an atheist does exist, I mean, they would just logically kill themselves, because or sewer slide, or whatever the YouTube friendly term is, um, because there would be no point of going on. The world is too rough, it's too hard. Even when you have all of the things that you thought you wanted, or all of the things that society tells you will bring you happiness, life is still very difficult. No matter how much money you have, no matter how many women, no matter if you have a family and children, life is still so difficult. And it's probably 90% suffering to get a 10% return of happiness and joy, or relaxation, or a reprieve from the toil, from the drudgery of life, having to go to a 9 to 5 job, doing something that you don't really want to do in order to, and that's most of your life, right? Most of your life you're toiling away in a factory, or at a desk, or doing something for somebody else in order to scrape by a meager existence. And what is the point of this? When you really do a cost benefit analysis, if you truly believed that just nothing happened after you die, wouldn't it just be preferable to die? So that's one thing. But people stubbornly go on. There's some sense, something inside of them that compels them to go on and to live. And they might chalk this up to, every animal wants to survive for some reason, to pass on their genetics, or some sort of evolutionary description of why human beings would go on in an absence of a belief in afterlife. But I just don't think that this is enough. If And I've struggled with this myself. I think a lot of young men who are struggling to find purpose and meaning, and a cohesive, a coherent belief in something more than materialism. You are struggling with these ideas of death and life, and purpose, and why go on? Why struggle? Why go through all this pain in order to eke out a dribble of happiness, right? Um, so, in page 30, he goes to his hideout in a van which is buried in a pile of cars. He is hiding from the literal horrors of dystopia in the laundry room, van, and also in the video games, right? So this is the large theme here, seems to be escapism, right? He's escaping into this laundry room where he's, huddled into a corner playing video games. He's hiding from his abusive aunt, and then he's he has a little hideout, buried in this pile of cars, where he uses his virtual reality system and goes into Oasis. And this is another little, it's like a little den, a little hole where he's hiding from, a cave where he's hiding from the world around him, where he can feel safe. And so, and then ideological, yeah, so and he's also retreating into the Oasis, the video games itself. And that's also another hideout for him, to distract him from the crushing existential hell that he lives in. Um, so, page 31, it describes how the Oasis console is school issued. So the public schooling system has sort of doled out these Oasis consoles for young people so that they can go to school, they can enter into virtual school. This reminds me of, so we used to have, textbooks. The schools would give you your textbooks. You would be responsible for keeping them nice. You'd put a book cover on them, and if they were damaged or something, you would pay a fine or something. But eventually, I remember, then they started handing out laptops to students, little Chromebooks or something, and eventually handing out iPads, and so this is sort of this progression of technology replacing the literal text, ink on page, and um, this is the destruction of print, and so this sort of VR headset that the schools are giving them is it just reminded me a lot um, of how schools would hand out textbooks, and then eventually this became laptops and then iPads. Um, so this is the authors, and he's probably right. This is probably what's going to happen. It's going to be more economic. It's going to be easier for um, big brick and mortar institutions where all the children gather to learn. It's going to be a lot more economic, less taxpayer dollars being poured into these giant systems that they need heating and fund. They need all sorts of funding for all sorts of different things, and it's very expensive to keep this real physical location up and running. It would be much less expensive to sort of just give all of the children a virtual reality headset and have a classroom online. Um, so Page 33, items in the game have value, and in-game credits are a stable currency that can be used in real life, right? So in this video game, people are trading the currency for real things. I mean, this just, and we could see this in real life, right? With like RuneScape, there are people who have multiple accounts and bots, and they are running these programs where they're essentially going out and gold farming, farming gold in the game in RuneScape, for instance, and then selling it online outside of the game, or well, really they'd be selling it to other players in the game for outside currency, right? There are whole websites dedicated to this where people will spend $20 to get some amount of RuneScape gold, in the game, and so there's this confluence. There's this, between the currency in the game, this sort of fake currency, and real life dollars. People are exchanging real money for this video game currency. Or in World of Warcraft, a lot of people are farming gold in World of Warcraft in order to sell it in real life, right, for real life dollars to other players of the game. You could see this having lots of different applications. You could use it as a way to launder money, probably. So let's see. In page 38, IOI, Innovative Online Industries, are the main internet service corporation. Um, so this huge corporation that essentially has monopolized the all of the internet traffic, right? A service provider, right? And we can also see this in real life. These service providers, these internet service providers that have monopolized internet traffic and can essentially limit people's access to the internet if they deem you a public enemy. We saw this with Kiwi Farms, right? Kiwi Farms is this essentially just a forum where people go to talk about politics and laugh at interesting people or talk about topics, and it sort of garnered this reputation that was anti-establishment, and I think it was Cloudflare ended up denying them service, so that I'm not sure what's going on here with this microphone. But anyway, Cloudflare ended up denying them service, and they couldn't get their website hosted, right? I'm just going to mute the speakers here so that you're just listening to the mic so that we don't get any obnoxious pings. So limiting people's access to the internet because of this large monopolization of the internet service, and so they had to essentially go around and shop around for these smaller providers that would actually host their website so that people could access it. And you can see this being a problem, a limiting of access to information. So IOI, IRL, there is actually a real company called IO Interactive, the company behind the Hitman franchise. And I just thought this was an interesting correlation. It probably doesn't mean anything, but and just had an interesting little thought. I mean, imagine a world where assassination becomes the most popular form of sport as power politics takes the foreground and hits become the accepted currency of political exchange. I don't know. It might be an interesting idea for a narrative or something. As sort of life becomes less valuable, and we enter into this open source gladiatorial game, where people can pay cryptocurrency or something, or set up prizes, for hits. And we would have a lot of people taking part in that. You could get rich foreseeably by taking up these contracts on the dark web or whatever, and taking out politicians and journalists, or just people in general. So page 39, IOI sort of mirrors the tech corporations in real life by threatening to take over the vast majority of the internet, limiting free speech, and prioritizing advertisement and monetization. So, I mean, look at what has happened with Google and Facebook and, all of these different platforms that have really taken over and truncated and suffocated the online experience. I remember being younger, you could find basically anything you wanted on the internet. It was a wild west, really, where you could find the information you needed for any given subject. It was out there. Somebody was talking about it, and you could do a Google search and essentially find whatever you wanted, from big websites to small. And as everything becomes more corporatized and monetized, and these corporations sort of formulate these ideologies, and they fall into this ideological prism. A lot of this access to information has been taken away, right? It's much harder to find what you want on Google, because most of what you're going to find is going to be things that the corporations want you to see, things that are going to make you more compliant and adhere to the the overarching ideology of the corporations, essentially to mold you into a more efficient and less questioning corporate slave. So on this same page, the Sixers, it describes the Sixers. They are they are essentially the foot soldiers of this IOI, this large corporation. And they are sort of like the agents from the Matrix, except their avatars are controlled by real human beings representing IOI. And it makes me think, how much more efficient would they be if they would use artificial intelligence, if they would if they would use bots, right, for this stuff. So the Sixers are essentially the corporate army in Oasis of this IOI of the Innovative Online Industries, and they are the main villain of the story, who are trying to complete the contest and win the contest for themselves so that they can inherit the wealth of Halliday and take over Oasis, and regain and gain complete control over it so that they can monopolize it and monetize it essentially. Um, So here's an interesting quote from the book on page 40. My generation had never known a world without the Oasis. To us, it was much more than a game or an entertainment platform. It had been an integral part of our lives for as far back as we could remember. We'd been born into an ugly world, and the Oasis was our one happy refuge. The thought of the simulation being privatized and homogenized by IOI horrified us in a way that those born before its introduction found difficult to understand. For us, it was like someone threatening to take away the sun or charge a fee to look up at the sky. I mean, there you go. There's he's telling you that it's as important as the sun. The sun which gives us warmth and life. It's giving warmth and life to these poor human beings, and this is similar to internet age kids. Imagine taking away the ability to find anything you want online. Now, with the internet dying and Google and other companies changing its codes to restrict access to information and the proliferation of bots, this is happening to some extent, with the dead internet theory. Um, yeah, and you talk to people, and this is very true. You talk to people who lived before the internet, and life was much different. Now we are having the first generations of kids who were raised completely on the iPad, and couldn't imagine a world without the iPad, without these programs, without something able to capture their attention at all times. Um, and it reminds me of this Bret Easton Ellis interview that I was just listening to, where he's describing in the 80s when he was a kid going to the movie theater, and they didn't have smartphones, they didn't have anything like that, so he would just go into the movie theater, 20 minutes early and get his popcorn and everything and sit there and sort of just take a breath and just look around and maybe talk to people. And there wasn't this thing sort of capturing our attention at all times. You sort of lived and breathed in the world and had this experience that was much more. Time was slower. It's hard to describe this feeling, but whereas now you're going to the movies, you arrive 20 minutes early, you're going to be on your phone until the movie starts, right? Essentially, so this pace of life has sort of quickened, and we don't have this space where we are just looking around and observing life. There's no more space for boredom. Um, this is an interesting quality of life, modern life, that we have to struggle with. So here's another quote from page 49. Gunters loved to play the game of one-upsmanship and were constantly trying to prove that they had acquired more obscure knowledge than everyone else. But IROC totally sucked at it. Okay, so the reason I put this in, so first of all, the Gunters, funny name, the Gunters are the egg hunters, right? They're the Easter egg hunters. They're trying to find the Easter egg, and conquer the contest and win the prize money. Um, uh, the name itself, I mean, come on, Gunters, Gunt, really? I mean, it is kind of funny because you think about the people that are probably absorbed in video games all the time. And you have this sort of typical archetype of the neckbeard, who has a Gunt, and it's just an interesting word to use for. I don't know if the author was quite aware of what he was doing there, but Gunters, yeah, unfortunate wording. But Gunters loved to play the game of one-upsmanship and were constantly trying to prove that they had acquired more obscure knowledge than everyone else. So this is very Gnostic, right? The acquisition of knowledge to find enlightenment and mastery, creating a competitive environment for knowledge seeking, becoming masters over your peers, and knowledge as power. And people really are like this, and it is kind of funny, in these circles, in this subsect of of the population where trivia is really you're sort of trading. It's like your currency. You're trading in this intellectual trivia, and the more somebody knows about something, um, the more power they have within the more status they have within that subsect um, of the population. Knowing pop culture, knowing references, knowing this sort of deep lore of this fantastical fictional universe, this pop culture sphere. You can think of sort of uh, the guy at the old, we used to have VHS, we used to have movie stores, and you would go in and talk to the guy at the counter and say, hey, are there any good, what do you think about Bruce Willis, this sort of narrative, it's got these themes and everything, and there was sort of this, like a priest of pop culture, of film, of whatever, and so it really sort of had a real life, tangible, there was a necessity for some people to know this stuff, just for their jobs and everything. But it does have this. It reminded me of Gnosticism, that have acquired so much secret knowledge that they are essentially masters over the initiates, over themselves, and over the whole world, right? And it's a very Gnostic belief, the worship of intellect, the worship of knowledge, um, instead of having sort of a uh, something more, something over this, right? Worshiping virtues, right? Or worshiping the origin of virtue. Um, you are essentially how these things never die. These systems of belief, these spiritual systems, they never die. It's just sort of a part of humanity. It's a part of the way we are, especially absent something greater. Um, um, but anyway, so on page 59, um, essentially they are battling over their knowledge of pop culture. Let me see if I can find this. What was it, page 50? Yeah, page 50. The note that I have here is that these main characters are insufferable turbo dorks who should have been bullied more. I mean, um, it's I'd say that sort of tongue in cheek, but it's kind of true. Like they are so pretentious in their sort of uh, arguing over who knows more about this and that. Um, let's see what I can. Yeah, so here they're battling over their knowledge. Um, so this guy IROC, who they all hate, comes into this chat room that they're in, um, and he calls him a poser. He says, "Poser, Penisville is calling me a poser." He turned to address the small crowd. This chump is so broke that he has to bum rides to Greyhawk just so he can kill kobolds for copper pieces, and he's calling me a poser. This elicited a few snickers from the crowd, and I felt my face turn red under my visor. Once about a year ago, I made the mistake of hitching a ride off-world with IROC to try to gain a few experience points after dropping me in a low-level quest area in Greyhawk. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Calls him a poser. That's right, I called you a poser. I stood up and got up in his grill. You're an ignorant, know-nothing twink. Just because you're 14th level, it doesn't make you a gunter. You actually have to possess some knowledge, right? So knowledge basically equals status in this circle. Word H says, God, I really the dialogue is pretty sophomoric, pretty cringy sometimes, but whatever, it is what it is. Word H says, nodding his agreement. We bumped fists. More snickering from the crowd. Now directing at IROC. IROC glared at us a moment. Okay, let's see who the real poser is, he said. Check this out, girls. Grinning, he produced an item from his inventory and held it up. It was an old Atari 2600 game still in the box. He purposefully covered the game's title with his hand, but I recognized the cover artwork anyway. It was a painting of a young man and a woman in ancient Greek attire, both brandishing swords. Lurking behind them were a minotaur and a bearded guy with an eye patch. Know what this is, Hotshot? iRock said, challenging me. I'll even give you a clue. It's an Atari game, released as part of a contest. It contains several puzzles, and if you solve them, you could win a prize. Sound familiar? iRock was always trying to impress us with some clue or piece of Halliday lore he foolishly believed he'd been the first to uncover. Gunters loved to play the game of one-upsmanship, and were constantly trying to prove they had acquired more obscure knowledge than everyone else, but iRock totally sucked at it. You're joking, right? I said. You just now discovered the Sword Quest series? iRock deflated. You're holding Sword Quest Earthworld, I continued, the first game in the Sword Quest series, released in 1982. I smiled wide. Can you name the next 3 games in the series? His eyes narrowed. He was, of course, stumped. Like I said, he was a total poser. Anyone else? I said, opening the question up to the floor. The Gunters in the crowd eyed each other, but no one spoke up. Fireworld, Waterworld, and Airworld, H answered. Bingo, I said, and we bumped fists again. Although Airworld was never actually finished because Atari fell on hard times and canceled the contest before it was completed, iRock quietly put the game box back in his inventory. You should join up with the Suxers, iRock, H said, laughing. They could really use someone with your vast stores of knowledge. iRock flipped him the bird. If you two F-words already knew about the Sword Quest contest, how come I've never once heard you mention it? Come on, iRock, H said, shaking his head. Sword Quest Earthworld was Atari's unofficial sequel to Adventure. Every Gunter worth their salt knows about this contest. How much more obvious can you get? Um, yeah, so and then that goes on with more of this, like for pages, of just them like basically, flaunting their like knowledge of the history of these video games and all this stuff, and it just comes off as like very like pretentious and just darky, right? And which it is what it is, right? Like it is a look into um, this subculture, and I'm not saying I'm totally above this. I mean, it's fun to sort of have these trivia contests, between you and your friends, and see who knows more and everything. But just the competitive nature of it, like, comes off as kind of silly. Um, but I mean, not trying to lambaste the book too much. I liked the book. I liked reading it. It was fun, and I recommend people to read it. Um, So, page 52, here's a quote from the book. Unlike their real world counterparts, most of the Oasis public schools teachers seemed to genuinely enjoy their job, probably because they didn't have to spend half their time acting as babysitters and disciplinarians. The Oasis software took care of that, ensuring that students remained quiet and in their seats. All the teachers had to do was teach. So, we've got a near total replacement of real human interaction. You can sort of tell the author was not, it seems very autobiographical. He wasn't very popular in school and was socially rejected. Um, this is sort of it's a horrifying look at how school is going to be, in the future with the software sort of babysitting and disciplining the children, and you don't have. There's something so human and valuable, I think, about class clowns and goofing off in class and this interaction with the teacher and discipline and everything, having this real human relationship with the student and the pupil, whereas a lot of this is taken out in this with the software, right? So something I noticed and that was interesting. Page 53, I spent my lunch period sitting in one of the green fields bordering the school, staring at the simulated scenery while I munched on a protein bar with my visor on. It beat staring at the inside of my hideout. I mean, it's just so soul-crushingly depressing, and I wrote here, it reminds me of dairy farms where the cows are kept in a cell with a VR headset on to keep them happy and increase milk production, right? So, I've got a link here to an article sort of outlining this here. Virtual reality for cows. It's a bovine-centric version of the Matrix that may seem far from reality, but some cows in Israel and elsewhere are living in virtual reality. So the only 2 farms that I could find that are doing this were in Israel and Turkey, which, think of think of it. I mean, I wasn't surprised by that, I guess, but very interesting. Farmers are putting headsets on their cows to increase milk production because the cows' real life is so distant from their natural environment that they are nervous and anxious and they produce less milk that tastes worse. And so they're essentially tricking the cows by putting VR headsets on them, and making them think they're in a green field, and it's just so dystopian and kind of sick. Um, but this is where we're going, right? I mean, I'm sure they'll be doing this to chickens, who are in a tiny little one by 2 by 2 cage or something for their whole life, crapping on the heads of other chickens, but they'll have a little virtual reality headset on, and they'll be producing more eggs because we're essentially tricking them and putting them in this virtual reality. It's really gross, if you think about it. And this is humanity now, right? Or this is where we're going if we're not careful. So page 56, a quote here: "I'd now racked up so many unexcused absences that I was in danger of being expelled. If that happened, I would have to return my school-issued Oasis console and visor. Worse, I'd be transferred back to school in the real world to finish up my senior year there. I couldn't risk that." He's essentially so antisocial that he can't stand the idea of real human interaction. Even the girl he has a crush on is this e-girl, that he doesn't know, has never seen. It's just it's really a sad view on reality. That and he described his life in school, that he was bullied and essentially had no friends and all this stuff, and everybody was horrible. Um, and I think it's a cynical look at school life. Everybody is bullied in school. It's a rite of passage. It's something that teaches you how to be a man, an adult. How to essentially deal with adversity and to push these things off. You're going to have to deal with that your whole life, with people not liking you and saying mean things to you and screwing you over, and the real I think adventure of that is that you can learn how to get over it. Get over yourself and struggle through the adversity and become stronger and um, more resolute, and become and to create a personality that can weather the storm of social conflict, to because there's this push and pull, and boys especially are so physical, and that's how we learn how to be men, and how to exist in a hierarchy, is that we push each other around and we wrestle and we challenge each other, right, as children, and growing up, this helps us to become stronger and more independent and resolute, and how to work within a hierarchy, with how to work within a group, and to know our place, and to sort of learn how to struggle up a hierarchy, and to gain status. Um, so I think that a lot of people have this very negative view of social adversity within the school system. I mean, I know I was bullied just like every other boy that I knew. Even the popular kids were sort of hazed by their friends, hazed by other groups. And this was just something that you had to do. You had to learn how to deal with and learn how to maneuver these things socially, and it taught you how to be a real human being. It taught you how to be an adult and to learn that nobody's perfect, and we have to. It taught you how to work with people and not just despise them and retreat from society. Um, so on page 58, Halliday found his first friend group playing D&D in the 80s. An important way for people who are bored by normal life or not socially adapted to find a social group. At least it's real with the rise of social media and free life coaching. The day of the maladapted dork is sort of coming to an end. Now nerdiness is becoming cool with a new chiseled athletic face to it, right? So, at least so D&D groups. I remember even when I was a kid, and we had cell phones and stuff. In high school, the D&D group was a very important thing for certain people who did not fit in with the normal crowd, and they but they still craved social interaction. They wanted friends, and this sort of allowed people something to gather around, the misfits to gather around, and to have a group, to have a social. Um, to have a social group, a social experience, and this is very important. And I think it was good because at least it was real. At least they were really getting together with people and talking to people and bantering and hazing each other, and they would gather around a real table with real game pieces and everything, and this was good. Um, it allowed them to grow as human beings, even though they weren't especially honored or accepted within normal society, right? And but yeah, and then the second part of my note there, um, we see these big blockbuster movies now, like the new Dungeons and Dragons movie was huge, and everybody went and saw it. It wasn't just for nerds. Whereas in the past, you have these fantasy movies, I guess, except Lord of the Rings. Even Lord of the Rings back in the day was for nerds. It was for geeks. If you were really into Lord of the Rings, you were sort of castigated as a nerd, and this is changing rapidly in our modern time. Nerdiness is becoming kind of cool, and with YouTube and everything, and all these athletic people on YouTube teaching people how to get ripped and exercise and everything, and how to look smacks or whatever. I think the age of the sort of nerdy bug boy, the 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 neckbeard, this sort of disgusting creature that is castigated by the rest of society is going away. Now you've got these people, these sort of unlikable, ugly people have a way to work on themselves, to work on their image, to learn how to exercise and all this stuff, and it's going away. And not only that, but a lot of the beautiful people, right, are are entering into this culture and finding out that it's actually really fun. There's something good here. There's something fun about fantasy, about Dungeons and Dragons, and video games. It's not just for ugly people. It's not just for nerds. It's not just for castaways. Everybody is enjoying video games now. Um, okay, so page 63. Here's a quote: At a time of drastic social and cultural safe and not medically proven to be addictive, right? Um, so this is interesting, right? Instead of remaining in the real world to fix the problems around them, humanity escapes into the virtual world, right? I mean, this is kind of a problem. This is happening now, right? Instead of working on the world, instead of remaining in the real world to fix the problems of society in their own lives, people are escaping into virtual realms and existing in them, living in them, um, because the world is too hard, it's too difficult. The problems that they are being confronted with seemingly are too overwhelming for them to deal with, and they are escaping into the virtual world, and the real world problems of humanity keep piling up, and instead of normal people solving them, the corporations will come in to solve them and essentially create a more constricted, uh, technocratic dystopia. So before people without the internet, people had to live in the real world. They were confronted with these issues. There was no escape except for maybe in literature or something, or the theater, and they had to deal with these problems. They had to work through them. They had no choice. And so there was more. It seems that there was more grassroots organization. There were actually more things to do, and problems would be confronted and solved by normal people. Whereas now it's sort of left up to the oligarchs, the power players to solve these problems because normal people have a cheap, an inexpensive, accessible way to escape into other worlds, to escape reality, and to escape the problems that are building up around them. Um, so, this is very interesting, and you could see this going back for a long time. The sort of the idea of the NEET, which we're going to actually look into, that plays into the story later on. We run into some NEETs, NEET, some hikikomori, who this is a phenomenon in Japan, where a large portion of the Japanese male population has essentially disappeared from society into their rooms, relying on their parents to take care of them and feed them and everything. And they're just sitting in their rooms playing video games all day or watching anime, and they've totally checked out of real life. They're not interested in talking to real girls or talking to real people. Life is just too hard, it's too demanding, and they would rather just sort of stew in their solipsistic existence, cut off from the rest of society, which demands too much of them, seemingly. So, on page 68, quote, I downloaded every game mentioned or referenced in the almanac. This would be Halliday's sort of diary of his life. The almanac. I downloaded every game mentioned or referenced in the almanac from Akalabeth to Zaxxon. I played each title until I had mastered it, then moved on to the next one. Right. So he's this almanac, this diary, this writing that Halliday left, describing his experience and all of his interests, becomes sort of this tome, this sacred tome for these gunters, and he's this is all that matters to him. That's all he's doing in his life. Um, You'd be amazed at how much research you can get done when you have no life whatsoever. 12 hours a day, 7 days a week is a lot of study time. So he has no life in the real world, and he's totally given up on bettering himself or his surroundings. Finding a job is apparently impossible, as I was talking about before. Even fast food jobs are essentially impossible. There's such a long line of people that need a job that the entry level jobs in society are essentially inaccessible to most people. And I think that this is, to a large extent, this can happen, this does happen, but people, I have more faith in the ingenuity of people. I think that normal people, they would create sort of a currency of their own, a currency of labor, and people still need things done. There would still be things to do for people in this world other than just your normal jobs, right? Like, in high school, you could see, people would go and mow lawns, people would do landscaping for their neighbors, people would paint houses. There's so many things to do for resources. You could do quite a lot. I think this is a little bit short-sighted. Um, so, just because there's not a normal job that you can get, flipping burgers or data entry or whatever, doesn't mean that there's not work to do, that other people, your neighbors, people around you wouldn't pay you in, food or whatever you need um, in order to do work for them. Everybody needs something done. So, page 73, quote, and prior to his death, Halliday had set up a foundation to ensure that the Oasis public school system would always have the money it needed to operate. The Halliday Learning Foundation also provided impoverished children around the globe with free Oasis hardware and internet access so that they could attend school inside the Oasis. So, my comment before, this is sort of an answer to the comment. What is he doing? With all of his wealth, he's just creating this contest. Well, we can see here that Halliday actually is, doing some good with his money. Giving education to children, right, and giving them access to education in a world that is no longer really providing them with access to this education. Um, he's doing something good for humanity with his money as well. He's not just hoarding his wealth and creating this contest. He's also doing other things. So, page 77, I spotted some students from my school walking toward the nearby football stadium on their way to watch the game and root for our team. I wasn't sure why they bothered. They could just as easily have watched the game via vid feed in any empty seats in the stands would be filled with randomly generated NPC fans who would wolf down virtual sodas and hot dogs while cheering wildly. Occasionally, they would even do the wave. So he's got no sense of like team spirit. Going to an event to give moral support to his fellow students, totally alienated. Um, it's just like, even his friend, his best friend, competes in like virtual sports games or whatever, right? I mean, you would think that he would have some sense of, going to a location physically to root people on, to be moral support for somebody, just like you would go to a football game to cheer on your friend who's on the football team or something, to add moral support. And it's a fun thing that people do together. He's totally, he can't understand why people would do this. He's completely alienated from humanity and like social life, this idea that people would show up to a sporting event to give support to their friends or their team. Um, he's a total outcast, and he's embraced this outcastism. So yeah, this is basically when he has found out one of the clues. He's found out that he can one of the locations for one of the keys that he is searching for to unlock this gate to find the first Easter egg, and he's heading there. He basically has no money, so he can't teleport. He can't travel around Oasis, so he figures out a way to secure a voucher to go to a virtual game that is hosted by his school, and so that he can teleport for free across the virtual landscape and get closer to this dungeon, which is styled off of a Dungeons and Dragons game module, and find the first Easter egg. And so that's why he's at this football game, and of course he doesn't go to the football game. He just uses the voucher to pretend that he is, and then run off to the first location. Um, so it says here, and then of course the main enemy, the main boss of this D&D module is a lich, and there's a description here on page 78, quote, "A lich was an undead creature, usually an incredibly powerful wizard or king who had employed dark magic to bind his intellect to his own reanimated corpse, thus achieving a perverted form of immortality." And so this is a, a creature, an old. It's one of the more powerful creatures in the D&D universe. The description here is really interesting, though. An incredibly powerful wizard or king who had employed dark magic to bind his intellect to his own reanimated corpse, thus achieving a perverted form of immortality. It just reminds me of transhumanism. This is like transhumanism in medieval fantasy. Similar to tech billionaires trying to achieve immortality by merging with machines and download their brains into robots or dead bodies or potentially clone bodies, right? This is the, in my mind, in my estimation, this is the modern idea of a lich, and we can see the billionaire technocrats are trying to do this, with Neuralink, right, and things like that, trying to map the human brain so that they can somehow transfer their consciousness into a dead thing, into an organism, or into a dead organism, into a either a clone body or into a server somewhere, to to integrate with the machine, which is dead. It's a sort of necromancy, right? Trying to achieve this sort of state of immortality, um, this life extension, right? Because they're afraid of death. They're afraid of what's going to happen when they die. They don't want to die for some reason. They want to continue to exist forever. Um, and I guess the idea of death, is terrifying to them. And you would wonder, why is death this terrifying thing to these people who don't believe in the afterlife? Why, if it's just nothing, If you're just going to cease to exist, then why is it this terrifying thing? And you would rather live in this world full of adversity and problems, right? But for some reason, we have all of these professed atheists and everything, who want to live forever, and they'll do anything to do it to achieve that goal. Um, even you know even things that many people would see as degrading their humanity, degrading their soul. Um, so let's see. So he gets into this. He goes into the dungeon. He finds the first location. He studies it profusely and reaches the end. Conquers at the end of the game. He finds this lich. Instead of having to battle them, he has to beat them at. He has to beat the lich at this game. This arcade game, essentially called Joust, where you play as this knight who's jousting another player, and he's playing against the lich, and he eventually beats them. He starts to go back out of the dungeon and runs into this e-girl that he's been crushing on, who has also found the dungeon and is trying to get the key from the lich. So he has this dialogue with her on page 102. He says, yes, I know, I said defensively. The reason so many people are starving is because we've wrecked the planet. The Earth is dying, you know. It's time to leave. That's a pretty negative outlook, she said. If I win that dough, I'm going to make sure everyone on this planet has enough to eat. Once we tackle world hunger, then we can figure out how to fix the environment and solve the energy crisis. I rolled my eyes. Right, I said. And after you pull off that miracle, you can genetically engineer a bunch of Smurfs and unicorns to frolic around this new perfect world you've created. I'm being serious, she said. You really think it's that simple, I said? You can just write a check for $240 billion and fix all the world's problems? I don't know, maybe not, but I'm going to give it a shot. So you could see this girl, and they're talking about what are they going to do if they get the money, right? He just wants to build a spaceship and flee Earth, right? And she wants to help fix the world, She wants to do the right thing. Well, he's just interested in his own well-being and his own fifis. He's interested in his feelings and this sort of cynical outlook that we have to escape the only planet that we know, right? And abandon humanity to the hell that we've created. And she wants to help humanity. She's empathetic. She's sympathetic to the rest of the world. She's not completely solipsistic and captured in her own narcissistic delusions. I mean, it's kind of cool. So he's answering this question. There's this debate going on within the novel. What would you do with all of this money? If you had it in this world, in this hypothetical world, and his answer is to escape, and she wants to help. And so by the end of this book, it is resolved, and he sort of capitulates to her idea, but it's something that the main character is struggling with, and you sympathize with it, right? Like if you had all the money in the world, would you really want to sacrifice all of that to help the world, and it might not even work. It might make things worse, but at least you tried. This is a very difficult problem. You might just want to escape into the woods and build a mansion and create your own little paradise somewhere and escape. That is a very tempting idea. And a lot of people do this. So you can definitely sympathize with the main character here, even though it is wrong. His idea is, I believe, wrong. You can definitely see where he's coming from and understand where he's coming from. So let's see. On page 107, he essentially escapes the dungeon with the key. He has the first key. Now he has to find the first gate, and he believes that it's on this virtual planet where Halliday has recreated his old neighborhood from the 80s. So he goes to this neighborhood, and he goes to Halliday's house. On page 107, it says, the house was empty for whatever reason. Halliday hadn't For whatever reason, Halliday had decided not to place NPC recreations of himself or his deceased parents here. Perhaps that would have been too creepy even for him. However, I did spot a familiar family photo on the living room wall. This portrait had been taken at the local Kmart in 1984. Remember Kmart's? But Mr. and Mrs. Halliday were still dressed in late 70s fashions. 12-year-old Jimmy stood between them, glowering at the camera from behind thick eyeglasses. The Hallidays looked like an ordinary American family. There was no hint that the stoic man in the brown leisure suit was an abusive alcoholic, or that the smiling woman in the floral pantsuit was bipolar, or that the young boy in the faded Asteroids t-shirt would one day create an entirely new universe. Looking around, I wondered why Halliday, who always claimed to have a miserable childhood, had later become so nostalgic for it. I knew that if and when I finally escaped from the stacks, I'd never look back, and I definitely wouldn't create a detailed simulation of the place. So yeah, it makes you wonder, was Halliday's life so bad as a child? You know, he talks about his mom being bipolar and his father being an alcoholic. I mean, these were, I guess, pretty normal problems, for that people deal with. It seems like they raised him in a nice suburban neighborhood. Were things really that bad, or was it just that he was kind of like a cynical, ungrateful teenager? I don't know. Um, he was rich by the age of 13 and had no idea how hard it was to struggle through adulthood. Was he, sort of blaming his parents, and to alcoholism and bipolarism and to become sort of mentally broken? And maybe he just didn't. Maybe he didn't give his parents enough credit. That they were imperfect people and maybe were abusive to some level, but he couldn't really forgive them, for sort of in the context of reality, life and the world and how hard it is, and maybe that they weren't perfect people, but that he could forgive them because um, they were struggling through a hellish existence, the struggle of humanity of living and surviving in a world that essentially just wants to crush you and take your money. Um, a world that punishes you for having children. Um, and still they had this child and raised him, and apparently he had enough resources to uh, be intelligent and eventually create a groundbreaking business and become wealthy by the age 13. So you wonder if he was not giving enough credit to his parents, and not really seeing the problems that they had to face, and and forgiving them for that. Um, I think a lot of people go through that as well. They just don't understand how difficult it was, okay. So he finds the gate. He beats this game, and the gate opens. And it says, quote, "I climbed up on top of Halliday's desk so I could reach the lock, then slid the copper key into the keyhole and turned it. The entire gate began to glow as if the metal had become superheated, and its double doors swung inward, revealing a field of stars. It appeared to be a portal into deep space. 'My God, it's full of stars,' I heard a disembodied voice say. I recognized it as a soundbite from the film 2010. Then I heard a low, ominous hum, followed by a piece of music from that film score, also Sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss. So that's that bum, 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 that we hear in the beginning of 2001 A Space Odyssey when the monkeys are touching the obelisk and achieving intellect, right? This sort of occult myth being told by Kubrick in 2001 of monkeys is essentially a hermetic story. It's a story of Hermes bringing the fire to humanity, or who was it? I can't remember the exact story here, but um, essentially it was who did that? Ah, God, there was this demigod or this ancient Greek god that stole the fire from Mount Olympus and brought it to humanity, and then it was punished for this. Right? It reminds one of the Garden of Eden, right? When the serpent, when the devil um, sort of seduced them into eating from the tree of knowledge, and then they gained the knowledge of life and death and good and evil, and they were no longer innocent and were cast out of Eden, um, because they, were no longer what they were meant to be, right? I mean, they were no longer these innocent children living in this Edonic paradise. Um, they had become something different, something more, something altered, and you can see this in 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then this is a reference here. My God, It's Full of Stars, from the sequel, 2010, and I have this note here. The stars represent the stars that Halliday and Wade idolize in films, music, video games, comic books. Wade is falling into the stars and will become one of them and one with them, which has already begun to take place by his obsessive study of their works and lives. 2010 is the sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which describes how humanity will be initiated into a new form of human being and gnostically transcend biological humanity. Right? So essentially, he is falling into this sea of stars, right? And who are the stars? Who do we call stars? You have that sidewalk where we put the stars in Hollywood. The stars are, Elvis. Stars, I'm blanking on celebrities' names here. Brad Pitt. Tom Cruise. Def Leppard. All these stars, these celebrities. We call them stars because they're high above our heads. They're unreachable by normal humanity. All we can do is really look up and look at the light that they're gleaming down on us, and it's essentially, he's falling into this sea of stars, and he's becoming one of them, right? Through this, we'll see by the end of the story, he becomes the most famous person in the world. He becomes a star, hanging above, the heads of normal human beings, a state unattainable by the masses. He and through his deep study, immersing himself in the lives and the history and the works of these stars, he is becoming one of them. He's becoming one in mind with them, one in heart, and he is essentially, a star is being born, right? He's being recreated, initiated into the esoteric knowledge of Hollywood, of the film and music industry, of video games, and he's becoming a star. He's becoming one with them, in a sort of mock communion. Um, and of course his scripture, which would be the almanac, the diary that Halliday leaves behind, and all of these video games that he likes, and all of these movies and music, and this pop culture is his scripture. That's his ancient texts, which he is absorbing. And so, most Christians try to read the Bible every day. This is how they more closely align themselves with the mind and heart of God, and this is a parallel in his life, where instead of reading the Bible or the lives of saints, he is reading Halliday's diary, and reading all of these pop culture books, and watching all these films and playing all these video games and listening to all this music, which is essentially his modern scripture. He is aligning himself with the mind and heart of Halliday, which is his sort of antichrist, mock Jesus, right? And not anti as in opposition, but anti as in a replacement for, right? Um, he's become a sort of god to the protagonist, um, which he is trying to emulate. And you will see by the end of the novel that he does become him. He takes the place of him. He sits in the place of Halliday, which is his God, becoming God. And so, in Christianity, you take communion, you read the scripture, you become one with God and the saints. And so, in that way, you are, in a way, becoming like God, one with God, theosis. You are becoming one with God, and and sitting with him, right, in heaven. So this is in a way very parallel to that, very parallel to the idea of Christianity. And I'm not sure if the author even realizes this, that he is that he can't escape these ancient sort of mythological structures that have been laid down. You can't escape the structure, the inherent structure of the universe and reality and human beings and behavior, and what we find important, and how we find meaning, right? So, and the rituals and the process and initiation into that meaning. So he is falling into the stars, sort of achieving this initiation process. So he goes into this game, and the game is essentially he's in a movie called War Games, and he has to play the main character and say all of the lines, and go through the movie, and yeah, essentially replicating the movie correctly in order to achieve points and win the game. So, page 113. I began to understand. The simulation was warning me that this was my final chance to deliver the next line of dialogue from the movie. If I didn't say the line, I could guess what would probably happen next. Game over. But I didn't panic because I knew the next line. I'd seen War Games so many times that I knew the entire film by heart. So he's literally becoming a character in a movie, a star, and now has to embody the star in order to beat the game. It's a sort of initiation process, right? War Games is an interesting title, as Wade is at war with reality, and in VR, real life, and VR in real life has implications of military training, psychological warfare on mass populations, and the molding of society by higher powers. Not only is Wade becoming one with the stars that he idolizes, Hollywood a communion in a way, but all of society is becoming one with the manufactured zeitgeist through highly immersive media, right? So, like, and there's all sorts of theories and everything. You talk, certain people have the opinion that Hollywood in itself is like a big military operation, right? Sort of molding the minds of people, shaping our minds to see the world in a certain way. Video games could fall into this, and literature, a lot of literature. There's Operation Mockingbird, where the news apparatus of the West was taken over by the intelligence agencies because they saw it as a perfect way to mold the perception of the population so that they could keep us all in line. This is, you could say this is the macro version of MK Ultra instead of kidnapping somebody and locking them in a room and electroshocking them and brainwashing them and splitting their personalities. On an individual level, this is happening on a population level, on a mass societal level, where where we are essentially being brainwashed and our perception is being altered, and our ideas of reality are being replaced via suggestion, through the media, through movies and film and radio and music, and video games, right? Our idea of reality and what we see with our eyes is being replaced by the idea that the wealthy want us to see, right? So let's see. In the War Games, essentially the main character is has to prevent the United States nuclear ICBMs from launching at the Soviet Union. On page 116, Wade says, by the time I reached the final scenes of the movie, I was starting to get twitchy from exhaustion. I'd now been up for over 24 hours straight, jacked in the entire time. The last action I had to perform was instructing the WOPR supercomputer to play itself at tic-tac-toe. Since every game the WOPR played ended in a tie, this had the improbable effect of teaching the artificially intelligent computer that global thermonuclear war 2 was a game in which the only winning move is not to play. This prevented the WOPR from launching all of the United States ICBMs at the Soviet Union. I, David Lightman, a teenage computer geek from suburban Seattle, had single-handedly prevented the end of human civilization. So this is really interesting. It's sort of like this. So a geek, a nerd, a misfit, a castaway, is the savior of humanity, saving humanity from annihilating itself with nuclear missiles, which is kind of interesting because they are the ones who invented the missiles, right? There's a quote, that an idea that nerds will destroy humanity, nerds will be the end of the world, right? So he's essentially fixing a problem that other nerds created. And so tic-tac-toe is played on a number symbol, a small version of a chess or checkers board, a symbol of duality in Gnosticism, the idea that good and evil are opposites of each other that bring the universe into balance. War Games involves nuclear war between U.S. and Soviets, whereas in the movie 2010, it involves a joint mission between U.S. and Soviets to Jupiter, the planet symbolizing the Greek god Zeus, the ruler of the non-Christian god or demons equivocal to Satan. So, you can see sort of the duality here, right? The black and the white, the checkerboard, which is the basis for Gnostic belief in creation, right? They believe in the duality of black and white and darkness and light and fire and ice. That everything sort of swelled out of chaos, and that creation is brought into existence and brought into balance by the balance of good and evil, right? That good and evil are opposites of each other, and not and that there's no like really qualitative difference between the two. Which is a Gnostic idea. In Christianity, the belief is that there is good, and that evil is essentially the absence of good. Right? It's not the opposite of good. Evil is not a thing in itself. It is an absence of a thing. Right? And so in 2010, the U.S. go on a joint mission with the Soviets, and in war games, there's a opposition with the Soviets, right? So it's like this dualism, this opposition, this opposites, this play of opposites, and in 2010 they go to Jupiter, which is a planet symbolizing the Greek god Zeus, and there are some really interesting. There's a paper I linked here. Satan, Zeus, Baal, and the Prince of Rome, in which they describe, they very logically lay out that from the Christian perspective, Zeus is Satan, right? Like Zeus is the god of the gods of Olympus, who are all very bad people, right? I mean, Zeus is a rapist. They're all sort of ambivalent to humanity. Their punishments for humanity are very cruel compared to the real idea of hell or Hades. The Greek gods are much more cruel and disdainful towards humanity, and essentially Zeus, as the ruler of the gods, is the ruler of Rome, really the chief god of Rome, and the chief god of Athens. Athens is the ruler of the demons, right? He's the prince demon, which would be Satan. And so they are in 2010. They are going to Jupiter, right, or Zeus. They're going to towards Satan, which is the serpent in the garden, which gives humanity knowledge of life and death, right, and throws us into this anxious cycle of death and the rise and clash of civilizations. And this adversity. So let's see. So I'm gonna sort of leave that there. Um, Okay, so I've got a quote from page 120. So he beats the game, and here's a quote from 122. Morrow and Halliday had grown up together, founded a company together, and changed the world together, but Morrow had led a very different life from Halliday's, one involving a much greater connection to humanity and a great deal more tragedy. Okay, so Morrow is Halliday's business partner that helped create Oasis, right? He's one of the two um, characters here that is he's going to play a huge part later on in the story, but he helped create Oasis, but he was the front guy. He was the face of the company because Halliday was very antisocial and fidgety and just wasn't very marketable. So Morrow had a greater connection to humanity, which comes with more tragedy, right? It comes with people dying, as we'll see later in the novel, and the sort of suffering of having to deal and struggle with people, but there's something beautiful there. It teaches us something about ourselves and our purpose and our meaning. Um, on page 123, but years later, Morrow wrote in his autobiography that he'd left GSS because, quote, we were no longer in the video game business, and because he felt that the Oasis had evolved into something horrible. It had become a self-imposed prison for humanity, he wrote, a pleasant place for the world to hide from its problems while human civilization slowly collapses, primarily due to neglect, right? And so talking about what we were mentioning earlier on, I wrote a note about this before I ever read this line that humanity is escaping into this self-imposed prison, that they are totally ignoring the problems in the real world, and that this actually drove Morrow out of the company. That he didn't want to take part in this anymore because he saw himself as essentially helping humanity to ignore its problems. So it's an answer to the question: is Oasis really helping humanity, or is it a band-aid allowing the problems to fester? At what point is escapism a problem? Because a little bit of escapism isn't bad. It can help us to sort of, hi, it can help. It can confront us with hypotheticals. It can help us to learn about ourselves and certain and other people, right? But at some point, it becomes a prison where we are ignoring real life. Um, so let's see. Da, 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 da. So on page 130, he says, roaming the halls unnoticed, I decided that I enjoyed having a secret identity. It made me feel like Clark Kent or Peter Parker. I thought my dad would probably have gotten a kick out of that. So his dad was kind of a cool guy who got him interested in a lot of this stuff. But this passage here, it makes me think of multiple identities, personas, alienated from his true self, prefers to spend time in a virtual space where he has superpowers, right? He's got like a split personality. There's his real self, and then there's his virtual persona, which he confronts people that he would rather live as. Um, it's just very interesting. So page 136, I turned around and saw that my avatar was standing in front of a large C-shaped reception desk. The IOI corporate logo, giant overlapping chrome letters, 20 feet tall, floated above it. Um, so he has found the first key. He's on this scoreboard. Everybody can see that he has found the first key, has beaten the first gate, and now he's being called into this private chat server by the representative of this giant corporation, IOI, and they're going to try and get him to lead them to the first key, and we'll see what's going to happen here. It's going to be something bad is going to happen. He's going to be confronted with a problem that's basically unsolvable. So he sees the large C-shaped reception desk, the IOI corporate logo, giant overlapping chrome letters, 20 feet tall, floated above it. So it may be questioned, is the abbreviation IOI a symbolic reference to Joachim and Boaz, the twin pillars of Masonry, which was long ago taken over by speculative Masons, or evil businessmen and social climbers? So in Masonry is a sort of Gnostic offshoot, an offshoot of Gnosticism, where the Freemasons worship knowledge, they worship the intellect, and they believe in this idea that of duality, of spiritual duality. And so Joachim and Boaz are these twin pillars in Masonry, which symbolize the duality of life, and so let's see, and so he is taken up into this thing. 137, as we completed our orbit, the IOI operations complex swung into view ahead of us. It consisted of 3 mirror surface towers, 2 rectangular skyscrapers, and on either side of a circular one. Seen from above, these 3 buildings formed the IOI logo. So the O, I believe, symbolizes creation. The world and the pillars on either side represent duality, chaos and order, life and death, good and evil, light and darkness, fire and ice. In pagan myths and Gnostic theology, creation comes about via the balance of these elements. That evil is necessary for good to exist, which is obviously bullshit from a Christian perspective, where good exists and evil is merely an absence of that goodness, a negative space where good should exist. So, Joachim and Boaz, it's the idea of the phoenix rising from the ashes, that you have to destroy something in order to rebuild it in your image, right? Instead of trying to be co-creative with good, and building yourself up into God's image, right, and restoring the image of God within you, you are essentially destroying the world in order to rebuild it in your image, in this sort of narcissistic creation mythos. Um, so on page 141, he's talking to Sorrento, who is this agent of IOI. He's trying to get him to give away the secrets. So, quote, Sorrento seemed to take my silence as a cue that he should continue. Contrary to popular belief, the Oasis really won't change that drastically when IOA takes control of it. Sure, we'll have to charge everyone a monthly user fee and increase the Sims advertising revenue, but we also plan to make a lot of improvements, avatar content filters, stricter construction guidelines. We're going to make the Oasis a better place. No, I thought, you're going to turn it into a fascist corporate theme park where the few people who can still afford the price of admission no longer have an ounce of freedom. So I just thought this was kind of funny. He describes it as fascism. I think this is kind of common that people don't really understand what fascism is. I'll read my note here. So Wade, and probably the author, doesn't really understand what fascism is, control of the markets by the state, but uses it to mean a level of control that is higher than desired, a diminishing of freedom, in this case by corporations, which would be more like a corporatocracy, in which corporations have taken control of the state or have formed a state unto themselves. The main difference lies in motivation. While corporations have profits as their main motivation, state motivations are much more difficult to discern and may include the promotion of religious values or order in general. Limiting freedoms may be good, such as the state limiting the freedoms to murder, commit fraud, or build WMDs in your backyard, or within a corporate context, limiting freedom may result in a better customer experience, such as a hotel limiting your freedom to throw trash all over the place and play loud music that might keep others awake, cordoning off lines at an event to limit customers fighting each other for space, or not letting moviegoers use their phones in a theater, which may distract others trying to enjoy the movie. Sometimes corporate restrictions can be bad, such as Google ruining their search engine to limit access to information, all AI being based towards corporate messaging, or in the case of the state, ruining car manufacturing by creating so many regulations that every car looks the same. So, there are good and bad things about control and limiting freedom. And I think a lot of people are using fascism sort of colloquially to refer to what is really corporatocracy, right? Where it's corporations taking over and abusing the population and controlling the population for the benefit of the corporation. Whereas in fascism, there is, I think, a lot more. There's a lot more possibility for actually just good things. Not being totally motivated towards money or monetary gain or profits, but if the state is run by good people, then you could actually see sort of a good fascism. You could hypothetically sort of imagine a good fascism where the state has control of the markets and is controlling the markets for the betterment of of the population, and not just for the few at the top. You know, that's really all it is. Our idea of fascism is basically, um, World War II, Nazis and all that stuff, which is, although they control the state, whatever. So we have this very jaded view of it, but you could actually sort of hypothetically see a fascistic state in which, in which a lot of good can come about. Um, so on page 147, um, I felt the shock wave a split second after I heard the detonation and instinctively dropped to the floor of my hideout with my arms wrapped over my head. In the distance, I could hear the sound of rending metal as several trailer stacks began to collapse, ripping free of their scaffolding and crashing against one another like massive dominoes. These horrific sounds continued for what seemed like a very long time, then it was silent again. So, the IOI, Sorrento, basically says, if you don't lead us to the egg and you don't work for us, we're going to blow up your house. They think that he's in there, so they're going to kill him, take him out of the contest. And he refuses because he, uh, you know, doesn't see a way out. They're just going to kill him anyway, even if he does give them the information. And so he refuses and tries to call their bluff, and they end up actually blowing up his home and killing everybody in there. And so that yeah, that kind of sucks. And he doesn't go to the police because he thinks they won't believe him. So that's really interesting. You would think, even if there's a possibility that they won't believe him, maybe going to the police would be a good thing. Just out of the on the off chance that it would actually lead to a proper investigation and that he would bring these people to justice, but he doesn't decide to do that. Um, And so then on page 53, the Sixers IOI invade Ludus, which is the world which all the schools are on, and they take over the Tomb of Horrors, which is the first location where he found the key, surrounding it by force fields. So he is talking to his best friend on page 155, and he says, "Now you all know how far the Sixers are willing to go to stop us from uh, beating them to the egg," H said. "If they're able to locate any one of us, we're dead meat." I nodded. "So you should all take precautions to protect yourselves and your identities," I said, "if you haven't already." Um, so this is sort of like they're talking about internet anonymity, right? There's no internet anonymity anymore, right? Like, you have to fight very hard, and this is because of all of our subscriptions. You have to give your phone number to create a YouTube page. You have to do, you have to give them all of your biometrics. The phones are constantly taking pictures of your face, listening to your conversations. There's no anonymity anymore. But I remember in sort of an earlier era of the internet, you could be pretty much anonymous, and it was very important. You would never give out your email or phone number or your address or whatever online, your real name even. These things were much more guarded and protected because you knew that there were bad people out there who would use that information against you. But this sort of has disappeared in our modern age. Um, so page 163. So he's escaping onto a bus, getting out of. He's abandoning his hideout and moving to Columbus. Page 163. Every single seat on the bus was occupied. Most of the passengers put on their visors the moment they sat down. I left mine off for a while, though, long enough to watch the city of my birth recede from view on the road behind us as we rolled through the sea of wind turbines that surrounded it. The bus's electric motor had a top speed of about 40 miles an hour, but due to the deteriorating interstate highway system and the countless stops the bus had to make at charging stations along the way, it took several days for me to reach my destination. I spent nearly all of that time logged into the Oasis preparing to start my new life. And I just wrote a note here. What a hellish dystopia, filled with wind turbines and electric buses with capped miles per hour. I mean, is this the world that we really want to go into? He's talking about that climate change is a huge player in this, in destroying the world and bringing it into this dystopia. But you know, just, do we really want these electric vehicles, and will that really will that really solve the problem? It just sounds so horrible, and it's just totally limiting travel and everything. Um, and and all these wind turbines, killing killing all the bird population off, and not really even they're not even that effective, and they're just an eyesore, So anyway, he catches a bus and leaves the stacks. Uh, let's see, and I believe he gets invited to this birthday party. Um, Page 181, he gets invited to Holloway's, or sorry, Morrow's birthday party, who is the business partner of Halliday, the surviving member of the company. Page 181, quote, "The Distracted Globe was a famous zero-gravity dance club on the planet Niranor in Sector 16. Ogden Morrow had coded the place himself decades ago and was still its sole owner. I'd never visited the Globe before. I wasn't much for dancing or for socializing with the twinked-out wannabe Gunter Uber dorks who were known to frequent the place. He's totally like, totally uncharitable to the people who are just like him. But Ogg's birthday party was a special event, and so the usual clientele would be banished for the evening. Tonight, the club would be packed with celebrities, movie stars, musicians, and at least two members of the High Five. The High Five being the five Gunters who found the key. Um, so he's there with Artemis, which is his e-girl girlfriend, on page 185. Her avatar lost its human form and dissolved into a pulsing amorphous blob that changed its size and color in sync with the music. I selected the mirror partner option on my dance software and began to do the same. My avatar's limbs and torso began to flow and spin like taffy, encircling Artemis, while strange color patterns flowed and shifted across my skin. I looked like Plastic Man if he were tripped out of his mind on LSD. Then everyone else on the dance floor also began to shapeshift, melting into prismatic blobs of light. Soon the center of the club looked like some otherworldly lava lamp. So I just thought this was interesting, that dance is a transformative experience where all the dancers yield their singular will to the music and become something else. I wrote, think tribal dance rituals where the dancers dress up like they're gods and attempt to be possessed by them, right? Dance really is this transformative, spiritually transformative thing where, and it's communal, where everybody is sort of surrendering themselves and their identity into the rhythm, into the melody of the thing. And so, yeah, think of like, we can see like African tribes, or not just African tribes, but all of these native tribes that they'll be playing the drums and they'll dress up in the colorful costumes of their gods, and the whole point of the dancer is to be possessed by their demon god, essentially. And there's a lot of fertility rituals that go along with this, and yeah, so they're literally surrendering their will to the supernatural force of something beyond, right? And this is I just thought it was a very interesting sort of visual that he was providing here for the dancers at the club, and you really do see this on sort of a spiritual level when you're dancing. You go to a rave or something, and you can feel the rhythm, the pulse. It sort of takes you over. You become one with the beat, one with the music, and you become something else. Your mind is altered, right? It's almost a hallucinatory state where you behave and feel differently than if you were, say, sitting next to a stream fishing. Um, so so let's see. So he's talking to Artemis. He tells her he loves her, and on page 186, she shook her head. "You don't live in the real world, Z. From what you've told me, I don't think you ever have. You're like me. You live inside this illusion." She motioned to our virtual surroundings. "You can't possibly know what real love is." I felt like I'd been punched in the throat. "Are you breaking up with me?" "No, Z," she said firmly. "I'm not breaking up with you. That would be impossible because we are not together." There was suddenly venom in her voice. We've never even met, right? So he tries to profess her love for her, but she reminds him that they don't even know what real human relationships are like, only living virtually their entire lives, and that online relationships aren't real. I mean, this is something people are constantly trying to tell people. Your online girlfriend is not a real girl. She could be a 50-year-old dude. And this is actually referenced in the book. That he thinks she could be just like some 50-year-old guy. Pretending to be a girl. This is totally. But he's fallen in love with this avatar, with this persona that she's representing in this virtual world, and she's telling him, this isn't real. Our relationship isn't real. We have never met each other in real life. There's something, a real relationship. You need to be able to touch and feel and smell and taste and talk to the person in real life, and that's what a real and to be there with them, in real life, to truly become one with them in real life, to experience life with them. That's a true relationship, to be there with somebody, not in a virtual world, hanging out with their avatar, right? So on page 190, uh, he's in Columbus now. He's found an apartment, and let's see. So, page 190. No outside light ever penetrated my apartment. The single window had once provided a view of the Columbus skyline, but I spray painted it completely black a few days after I moved in. I decided that everything outside the window was a distraction from my quest, so I didn't need to waste time staring at it. I didn't want to hear the outside world either, but I hadn't been able to improve upon the apartment's existing soundproofing. Soul had to live with the muffled sounds of wind and rain. So I had to live with the muffled sounds of wind and rain and of street and air traffic. Even these could be a distraction at times. I'd slip into a kind of trance, sitting with my eyes closed, oblivious to the passage of time, listening to the sounds of the world outside my room. So he blacked out the one window in his apartment so that he didn't have to see the outside. He's completely isolating himself from even having to view life outside, and closing himself inside of this cell, shutting himself into a prison. There's a lot of this, repetitive, this pattern of imprisoning oneself, and being in this prison. He's the prison of society, the prison that he's creating for himself, the prison of the virtual world. Um, he's a total bugman neat. A bleak view of the pod life planned for humanity by the technocrats. So let's see. So on page 191, he is describing this VR rig. I guess I'll skip past that, but yeah, he describes this full body suit, where you could feel the game and the stuff that's happening in it. And I actually remember drawing up like a sketch for something like this. I wanted to develop this um, a long time ago, maybe like almost 10 years ago. I came up with this idea of like a full body VR suit that would allow you to feel, bullet impact, and picking things up and feel resistance inside the game. I just thought it was interesting that he basically came up with the same concept probably around the same time. So page 193, he says, I felt no shame about. Okay, this is kind of gross, but uh, he says, I felt no shame about masturbating. Thanks to Anorak's Almanac, I now thought of it as a normal bodily function, as necessary and natural as sleeping or eating. He's a gooning bugman pod dweller. He had a sex doll, right? But he got rid of it because he thinks, because he thought it was demeaning, but he still thinks that whacking off is good, right? He treats Halliday's Almanac, another Bugman Gooner, as a sort of anti-Bible, using it to justify his maladaptive behaviors. This is what atheism gets you. So it's, yeah, I mean, and look, young men, especially, I think, have to deal with this animalistic sex drive, and you can't. It's hard to blame somebody for giving into that, but at the same time to glorify it, to say it's as important as eating or sleeping, I think is just way off base, and kind of pathetic. You can live without relieving yourself sexually. There are people who do this and they live more joyful lives than anybody else, right? The saints, the monks, living in monasteries, they uh, they don't do these things, but they still have to eat and sleep, and they live more meaningful and joyful lives than most people on planet Earth. But he's saying it's like necessary for existence. I just think that's so ridiculous and crude. Um, but yeah, anyway, so page 195. The hour or so after I woke up was my least favorite part of each day because I spent it in the real world. This is when I dealt with the tedious business of cleaning and exercising my physical body. I hated this part of the day because everything about it contradicted my other life, my real life, inside the oasis. He describes his life inside the oasis, his real life. It's literally replaced real life. The sight of my tiny one-room apartment, my immersion rig, or my reflection in the mirror, they all served as a harsh reminder that the world I spent my days in was not, in fact, the real one. Okay? So he's tormented by the fact that his fantasy life isn't real. Um, and I think at this point I'm going to take a bathroom break. Let's see, do we have a back soon? Taking a whiz, yep. Alright, I will be right back. Alright. Okay, so, um, yeah, and just as, so going back to this whole whacking off thing, where he's justifying it and saying it's as important as um, eating and sleeping. It's interesting because you know jacking it is just uh, a stale simulation. We have this theme of simulation of sex. You're not having sex with a real girl, which is what you are supposed to be doing, right? You are simulating it um, with your freaking hand, dude. Which is not cool. Um, and of course, I'm not judging anybody for giving into the animalistic desire that is natural. It's just, it's still not. It's not something that should be glorified or seen as necessary. It's something that you do when you're weak and when you don't have access um, to uh, to a real woman. To a relationship with a real woman. That's part of the problem. Is you're giving yourself. Not only are you becoming a slave to your desires, when you're already a slave to necessarily a slave to so many things like eating and sleeping, you're creating another shackle to put on yourself and replacing a relationship with a real person with this sort of circular relationship with yourself, this unnatural depravity. But anyway, so let's see. He's describing his apartment. Page 197. The shower worked a lot like an old car wash. I just stood there while it did most of the work, blasting me from all angles with jets of soapy water, then rinsing me off. I had no hair to wash because the shower also dispensed a non-toxic hair removal solution that I rubbed all over my face and body. This eliminated the need for me to shave or cut my hair, both hassles I didn't need. Having smooth skin also helped make sure my haptic suit fit snugly. I looked a little freaky without any eyebrows, but I got used to it. Um, so there's more here, but I'm just gonna leave it there. I mean, this is like if you've ever seen THX 1138, like this is straight out of that. I mean, no hair, just this cue ball, like being this thing. It's just so dystopian, just like shaving off all your hair to make it easier, to live in this virtual world is just a wild visual. Um, and I mean, if you've ever seen anybody without eyebrows, it just looks kind of freaky, like they look alien kind of. Um, so his virtual reality is a prison, just as he has made his real life a prison. So he finds these Japanese guys. They're part of the High Five, the five people who found the key, and he's hanging out with them. Um, and he goes on an adventure, and they find this beta capsule, which lets them turn into Ultraman, which is like this old Japanese TV show. This giant alien guy. So page 204, he said, "You two should keep the beta capsule." He's talking to these Japanese brothers. Your Euroterman is Japanese greatest superhero. His powers belong in Japanese hands. They were both surprised and humbled by my generosity, especially Daito. "Thank you, Parseval-san," he said, bowing low. "You are a man of honor." So every time these Japanese guys are in a scene, they say honor at least once. Like it's really funny. Like the author, he's just really got this like kind of funny like white guy uh, idea of Japanese culture, this sort of like neckbeard, katana wielding, fedora wearing sort of idea. I watch Japanese movies. I love Japanese film, and like I can't think of one where they once said honor, right? Like even the samurai ones, like they never mention honor. This is like this, and of course, honor is a part of their society and everything. It's sort of ingrained in their spiritual beliefs and everything, but it's just not like something that they say all the time. You are honorable. Oh, you are a man of honor. He doesn't have honor. They're never saying that, right? Like it's just like it's just a silly kind of thing that he keeps putting in every single scene with these Japanese guys. They say something. They say honor. They say the word honor. It's just like a really. I wonder if it's like kind of a joke, like he's creating a caricature of Japanese people or something. But on one hand, he seems to be like I don't know. I don't know. Whatever. So page 205, he says, "I logged out of my own Oasis account and then used my rig to log into a separate Oasis account I had used for work. The login process completed and I took control of a happy help desk avatar, a cookie cutter Ken doll that I used to take tech support calls. This avatar appeared inside a huge virtual call center, inside a virtual cubicle, sitting at a virtual desk in front of a virtual computer, wearing a virtual phone headset. I thought of this space as my own private virtual hell. Helpful Help Desk Inc. Took millions of calls a day from all over the world, 24/7, 365. One angry, befuddled cretin after another. There was no downtime between calls because there was always several hundred morons in the call queue, all of them willing to wait and hold for hours to have a tech rep hold their hand and fix their problem. Why bother looking up the solution online? Why try to figure out the problem on your own when you could have someone else do your thinking for you? I bet this is so I wrote here, I bet this is the author venting about his own previous job through the Proteg. I mean, so every story, every book is going to be slightly autobiographical. There's going to be a little bit of the author and the protagonist. And this just seems like, he must have worked in a call center and had to deal with like an endless sea of helpless people. I think though it is funny that, these help desk people are oftentimes like so critical of people that need help, like just sort of assuming that everybody else knows what they know and have the capabilities that they have. But anyway, um, so okay, so let's see. He is talking to this Japanese kid. He said so. Page 241. We are skipping ahead quite a bit here. We're Gunters, I said, trying to fill the awkward silence. We live here, in Oasis. For us, this is the only reality that has any meaning. Akihide nodded. A few moments later, he continued to talk. He told me how he and Toshiro had met 6 years ago when they were both enrolled in an Oasis support group for hikikomori, young people who had withdrawn from society and chosen to live in total isolation. Hikikomori locked themselves in a room, read manga, and cruised to the Oasis all day, relying on their families to bring them food. There had been a hikikomori in Japan since back before the turn of the century, but their number had skyrocketed after the hunt for Halliday's Easter egg began. Millions of young men and women all over the country had locked themselves away from the world. They sometimes called these children the missing millions. So this reminds me of a show, an anime that I watched a long time ago called Welcome to the NHK. It's actually pretty funny, and it's about hikikomori, who has isolated himself from the real world and his struggle with that. So this is after, I believe, they have found the second key and went to the found the second key at this place. It's an old Zork simulation, which Zork is an old text-based game. And while they were there, the Sixers invaded and killed Akihide's brother in real life. And they're not really brothers, but they were brothers in the game. And so while they were assaulting, while the Sixers were coming and attacking them, they were fighting back, and one of the Japanese guys used Ultraman or whatever to fight back, and the Sixers used their agents in real life to break into the kid's apartment and stage his suicide. Right, so this is after that. So let's see. So then they're finding the second gate. Page 252. In one of the earliest journal entries in Anorak's Almanac, Halliday wrote that whenever his parents would start screaming at each other, he would sneak out of the house and ride his bike to the local bowling alley to play Black Tiger because it was a game that he could beat in just one quarter. On just one quarter. For one quarter, Black Tiger lets me escape from my rotten existence for 3 glorious hours. Pretty good deal. And then he's got another quote on page 256. Going outside is highly overrated. And right, so he's a total bug man. He's like, he doesn't want to go outside, doesn't want to talk to people. He's just totally immersed in video games and basically making his problems worse, right? Not dealing with his problems of not being able to socialize, not dealing with his family problems. He's escaping into this virtual reality because reality is too harsh for him, and he can't control it. So let's see. Okay, so I believe he beats this game called Black Tiger and gets the second beats the second gate. Now there's only one gate left, and he's in his apartment, and the IOI corporate police are coming in they break through his door and come to arrest him. and he's being confronted with like this corporate windbag named Wilson. So page 267. Wilson looked up into the lens of my hallway camera and smiled pleasantly. Mr. Lynch, he said, my name is Michael Wilson, and I'm with the Credit and Collections Division of Innovative Online Industries. He consulted his clipboard. I'm here because you failed to make the last 3 payments on your IOI Visa card, which has an outstanding balance in excess of $20,000. Our records also show that you are currently unemployed and have therefore been classified as impecunious. Under current federal law, you are now eligible for mandatory indenturement. You will remain indentured until you have paid your debt to our company in full, along with all applicable interest, processing and late fees, and any other charges or penalties that you incur henceforth. Wilson motioned towards the drop cops, which are the corporate police. These gentlemen are here to assist me in apprehending you and escorting you to your new place of employment. We request that you open your door and grant us access to your residence. Please be aware that we are authorized to seize any personal belongings you have inside. The sale value of these items will, of course, be deducted from your outstanding credit balance. So, this is a future where indentured servitude and corporate armies are legal, and they call the indentured servants indents, which is kind of a funny name, like an indent, a dent, Um, so I don't know. I just thought that was kind of funny, but this in this corporate lingo, um, is sort of funny. Um, let's see. So he's describing the outside world. He's being taken from his building and arrested by IOI for outstanding debt. And page 273, a thick film of neglect still covered everything in sight: the streets, the buildings, the people. Even the snow seemed dirty. It drifted down in gray flakes like ash after a volcanic eruption. The number of homeless people seemed to have increased drastically. Tents and cardboard shelters lined the streets, and the public parks I saw seemed to have been converted into refugee camps. As the transport rolled deeper into the city's skyscraper core, I saw people clustered on every street corner and in every vacant lot, huddled around burning barrels and portable fuel cell heaters. Others waited in line at the free solar charging stations, wearing bulky, outdated visors and haptic gloves. Their hands made small, ghostly gestures as they interacted with the far more pleasant reality of the Oasis via one of GSS's free wireless access points. So the city is full of homeless people who still have access to VR despite their poverty. Um, it's not mind-altering tech we will lack, it's access to healthy living. Yeah, so I mean, we can see this now, right? I mean, like, you've got homeless people who have cell phones. And we see this crowding, this overcrowding of the homeless in the cities. We see that now, taking over parks and turning them into tent cities. Parks where people would have played football and frisbee and walked their dogs and everything now are essentially camps for the homeless. And you see this all over the place. Um, but yeah, a thick film of neglect still covered everything in sight. I thought that was really a good visual and a description of reality, right? They're all neglecting the society around them and escaping into this virtual world, and being sort of placated by this virtual world instead of having to deal with reality and fix their problems. Okay, so finally we reached 101 IOI Plaza in the heart of downtown. So this is interesting. Room 101 is where the system broke the protag from 1984, destroying his personality in order to rebuild him. Order out of chaos, Phoenix from the ashes, the methodology of the mystery schools, Freemasons, the occult. A prescription for attaining power over the human mind and the material world. The idea that you must destroy something in order to refashion it in your image. There's an old quote from an anarchist, Mikhail Bakunin, from 1842. The passion for destruction is a creative passion. Right? So he's being taken into this, essentially this version of Room 101, which is this giant factory where he will be put into indentured servitude. And this is, you can see where the author got a lot of inspiration from other dystopian films and novels. 1984, THX 1138, and I believe he actually references THX later on here. But yeah, so they're going to destroy his personality, take away his identity, and rebuild him into a worker slave, right? Um, so, which is going along with this theme that this pattern that we've been identifying all throughout the book, of this sort of Gnostic theme of this Freemasonic theme of breaking down the human being. It reminds you of MK Ultra, right? To break down the personality, to split the personality, and create useful, compartmentalized personalities for the utilization of the corporations, for the controllers. Okay, so yeah, so here he references THX, page 274. Then I was led into a warm, brightly lit room filled with hundreds of other indents. They were all shuffling through a maze of guide ropes like weary, overgrown children at some nightmarish amusement park. There seemed to be an equal number of men and women, but it was hard to tell because nearly everyone shared my pale complexion and total lack of body hair. And we all wore the same gray jumpsuits and gray plastic shoes. We looked like extras from THX 1138. So THX 1138 is one of my favorite movies, actually. In the film, everyone is born as property of the state in an underground facility, enforced by robots and have never seen the sun. The citizens are forced to worship AI and work until liquidated. Right? So they've created a god out of the machine, and essentially the human beings are subservient to this machine and live underground and are totally um, essentially controlled by drugs and sex, and natural sex is outlawed, and so it's essentially reproduction is all controlled by the machine. Um, so on page 275, he offers a horrific description of indent processing. They delouse him, inject him with vaccines, make him watch a training video 10 times, attach an ankle bracelet and live camera monitor to his ear. I mean, if you think about it, we already have this, right? This is normal reality for people, living in Western society. We are constantly monitored by street cameras, and our own phones, our own wearables, and we the the news cycle is sort of like this brainwashing, glaze of this training video. Um, they inject him with all these vaccines and stuff. I mean, it's and you can see, we just went through this we just went through this corona scare, where everybody was essentially coerced into getting this DNA altering vaccine. So there's all these, and this was written before all of this, long before. So it's interesting. It's just interesting to see the themes here and the patterns that we see replicated in real life. These little patterns that you can see within the art, and so anyway, so he gets a job as technical support within the factory. Page 277. Your first technical support shift begins in 7 hours. The HR computer droned softly in my ear. You have until then to sleep. Turn left at the intersection in front of you and proceed to your assigned HAB unit number 42G. So his apartment that they nabbed him out of was on the 42nd floor. 42 is the number, and now he's being put into HAB unit number 42, right? 42 is the number with which God creates the universe in Kabbalistic tradition. Kabbalistically, one of the names of God is made up of 42 letters. In heavily, so this is a quote from like a Jewish website. In the heavily symbolic book of Revelation, 42 is used twice as the number of months allotted for destructive violence. And in Matthew, the root of the word translated as begat appears 42 times in the genealogy of Jesus. 42 is made up of, or maybe this isn't from a Jewish website, but I have one linked here. So in Matthew, the root of the word translated as begat appears 42 times in the genealogy of Jesus. 42 is made up of 6 and 7, showing a link between mankind and God's Spirit and a link between the Antichrist and Jesus Christ. Also, the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything in Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right, which probably has something to do with Kabbalism. So I'll go into Okay, so this is from a Jewish website here. 42 signifies a new unified creation that is a process with components, right? A new unified creation. So he's being recreated by the system, right? To be essentially fit into the process of this corporation. I will open up this link to this betamuna.org, which is a Jewish website here where they're just talking about Kabbalism. 42. To understand this number, we must first understand its components. Mem and Bet, 40 and 2. It is also an allusion to the written and oral Torah. It 40 represents the written Torah, which begins with Bet. Sorry, Bet represents the written Torah, which begins with Bet. The number 42 represents, or I can't read this. The Mem 40 represents the oral Torah, which begins with Mem. It's used repetitiously in Bamidbar numbers to indicate they left one place and arrived at the next place. They traveled to 42 different places, right? So you can see 42 all over the place in the Old Testament, and the Jews, the rabbis have all of these different interpretations for why 42 is very important in Kabbalah, right? Which is very number oriented, right? So this is, and of course, Freemasonry is highly informed by Kabbalah, right? And has essentially permeated our popular culture and the sort of spirituality of conventional culture. This sort of religion of the state, right? Ironically, so. He says here, the Hab block reminded me of a mausoleum. It was a network of vaulted hallways, each lined with coffin-shaped sleeping capsules, row after row of them stacked to the ceiling, 10 high. Each column of Hab units was numbered, and the door of each capsule was lettered A through J, with Unit A at the bottom. So the coffins, I believe, signify their new life in death. Their old lives over. Now they are machines to be wielded by the corporation. It also mirrors his old apartment, which was a sort of coffin. In the Freemason ceremony for the initiation of new members, the inductee is laid on a drawing of a coffin with his face covered with a bloody cloth. Beyond the obvious skull and bones, crossbones insignia, of course, the most persistent story is that initiates spend their senior year in the basement crypt of the Bones tomb, taking turns lying in a coffin, and in 2 long, intense psychodrama autobiographical sessions in said coffins, recount their personal and sexual history to the other 14 chosen ones. So this is a quote from an article describing the initiation process for the Skull and Bones Yale Society, right, which is an offshoot of Freemasonry, the mystery schools, Gnosticism, yada yada. So it's an obvious inversion of the rite of baptism, where you go down into the waters of death and are resurrected in the life of Christ, right? Both former presidents Bush, the Bush Sr. and Bush Jr. were both members, as well as John Kerry, former vice president of this Yale Skull and Bones Society, right, where they use this coffin as an initiation service ceremony. So yeah, I mean, obvious connection to me. These Hab units are coffins, right, initiating these people into their new life of living death. Page 280. I wasn't permitted to have any decorations in my cube. I could spend some of them to purchase the privilege of decorating my cube, perhaps with a potted plant or an aspirational poster of a kitten hanging from a clothesline. I just wrote as a comment, it's too real. It's like, sort of this, he's obviously parodying real office life, where you accrue, perk points. The corporation gives you points for completing programs and being a model employee, and this sort of banal visual of the kitten hanging from the clothesline, like you see that all over offices, and it's almost mocking your the struggle and the vapidness of having to toil away in a windowless office. So page 293. Once I was dressed in my new maintenance tech threads. Okay, so at this point he has hacked into the system and stolen some a maintenance uniform, and he's making his escape from the system. Um, and so he says, once I was dressed in my new maintenance tech threads, I carefully removed the flash drive from its expansion slot and pocketed it. Then I picked up my ear gear and spoke into it. I need to use the bathroom, I said. So this is he doesn't say this explicitly in the text, but this is an obvious reference to Hitman, right? He's putting on a disguise, much like you do in Hitman. You know, you'll disguise yourself as a maintenance guy or something, and in Hitman Codename 47, the first Hitman, 47 says to a Chinese barman, I need to use the bathroom. This is kind of his way to get into this bathroom and plant like an explosive or something or a gun that he can use later. So yeah, 47 is also known for using disguises in order to fulfill his missions. So, you know, I just thought it was a really funny reference, and I wonder how many other references are in here that I just didn't pick up on. But I love the Hitman games personally. They are so fun to play, and the first one is very difficult. So much so that I have not even attempted to beat it. But yeah, Codename 47. You know, I need to use the bathroom. It's like a famous line from the game that was like sort of spoofed on a lot, uh, and he's using it in this context in the text here. So very funny. Page 303, we all watched the vidcap as Sorrento passed through the entrance and into the large gold-lined foyer that lay beyond. Sorrento's avatar crossed the polished floor and approached the large crystal door set into the north wall. There was a keyhole in the very center of the door, and directly above it, 3 words were etched into the door's glittering, faceted surface: charity, hope, and faith. So, really interesting. Um, so yeah, so at this point, Sorrento and the Sixers have gotten the crystal key before any of them, and they've gone to Halliday's castle and found the third gate, the final gate, right? And which is, you know, there's 3 gates, right? Which is sort of another reflection of the Freemasonic 3 initiations, right? In order to become a Mason, the Blue Lodge, you go through 3 degrees, 3 initiations in order to become a full-fledged Mason. This is kind of interesting, right? The magic of 3, and they even reference this later, that 3 is a magic number. Used a lot in the occult, and obviously this is sort of a bastardized inversion of the Trinity, right? The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity. Um, so yeah, I mean, you know, and you could see this. The evil cannot create in itself; it can only sort of ape and mock and bastardize that which is created, which is more proof that evil doesn't really exist. It's a non-existence of good. It's a not a dark reflection, but an absence, holes in the quilt of reality, if you will. Um, so I just thought it was funny. Charity, hope, and faith are inscribed above the door. These are all Christian virtues: charity, hope, and faith, right? Um, and he's using them here in the book above the door, the final gate, page 304. Him and his friends are talking about the Sixers finding the gate. They try every asinine thing you can imagine, I said. Sorrento recites the words on the gate in Latin and Elvish and Klingon. Then they get hung up on reciting the 1 Corinthians 13:13, a Bible verse that contains the words charity, hope, and faith. Apparently, charity, hope, and faith are also the names of 3 martyred Catholic saints. The Sixers have been trying to attach some significance to that for the past few days. Morons, H said. Holiday was an atheist. So, you know, it's interesting. Why would, you know, I just had the question, you know, why would an atheist believe in charity, hope, and faith? Faith in what? Hope for what? Charity for whom? And for what purpose? So obviously this is another pop culture reference he's just using here, and it has nothing to do with Christianity. But you know, you really can't escape Christian values if you're, you know, if it's the fabric of reality, if it's the foundation of reality, and we're just trying to describe that through the Christian theology, then you just can't escape reality, right? And this is actually kind of a, a funny theme in the book, right? You can't escape reality, and you're always going to be drawn back into it somehow because it's real, right? And you are real, and you are a real human being, and you were made to exist in reality. So page 317. Okay. So yeah. So page 317, he meets H in real life, and we find out that H is not a white boy. It is actually an obese, gay black chick. It's like, and I just, um, and she created this, white male avatar in order to essentially be able to maneuver the in the virtual space, and she got kicked out of her house when her mom found out she was gay. And it's just like, I thought, wow, this is, of course, right, of course the author's going to put this in there. It's like sort of it's just sort of funny. And I just, the thought that I had at the time was, well, why didn't he make her handicapped as well? Why not just, check off all the boxes, make her an obese, gay, handicapped black girl, but no, whatever. So we can get past that. He's obviously trying to sort of insert his progressive values into the book, but we can get past that because it's a fun adventure story, and whatever. So I'm just going to skip the quote that I pasted in there, and we'll move on here. Page 322. Ogden Morrow and Halliday had a falling out because Halliday was in love with Og's wife. So Morrow invites all of the the remaining surviving players, Artemis, H, Wade, and the Japanese kid who's still alive, Akahide. He invites them to his palace, his mansion in Oregon, I believe, and he's now having a conversation with Wade. Wade asks him why him and Halliday had a falling out, and Ogden Morrow informs him that Halliday was in love with Morrow's wife, right? And he could, and he, it's just funny because um, we'll get into this later, but it's just interesting. Halliday could not, he had this one-itis. He was so in love with Morrow's wife that he just couldn't get over himself, and couldn't find another girl. He had this. He was so obsessed with her that it essentially broke apart this lifelong friendship. So they are. So the Sixers, they create this force field around Halliday's castle so that nobody else can get in, and they can essentially solve the last gate. And you have essentially Wade calls upon all of the Gunters from around the world to gather at the castle, and he has a plan. He hacked into the servers when he was in the prison, which was the whole point of getting captured, and programmed one of their robots to do something to take down the force field. And so they take down the force field, and now all the Gunters are flooding into the onto the castle, and this massive battle commences. It's pretty epic, and Shoto, who is the remaining Japanese guy, sacrifices himself in the fight with the big boss, Sorrento, who is, taking on the form of this giant mech Godzilla. Wade then uses the Ultraman capsule to transform and avenge Shoto, killing Sorrento, the main villain, or his avatar, right? So page 338, H, Artemis, and Wade insert the crystal keys into the gate and save 3 is a magic number. The opening lyric to Schoolhouse Rock, 3 is the number of the Trinity, but also important to the occult, is the witching hour. But in this context, the meaning is probably more about how important friendship is, right? So, in order to open the last gate, they needed 3 keys to insert at the same time. So you can't open the last gate by yourself. You needed 3 people to do it. And so, sort of a symbolically saying you need people, right? You need people to achieve the goals in life that you want to achieve. You can't do everything by yourself, which is, I think, a good lesson, a good moral lesson in the book. That you need people. This isn't you can't isolate yourself in your own solipsistic universe. And actually, at the end, we'll revisit this theme, and Halliday sort of, or the AI representation of Halliday, admits this, right? So. Page 341, the Sixers use an item that blows up everything in the sector and kills everybody, but Wade gets an extra life from a quarter that he obtained from playing a perfect game of Pac-Man on the planet Arcade. When playing on an arcade cabinet, using a quarter will allow you to continue playing the game with extra lives if you insert it before the countdown. So earlier on in the story, Wade goes to this planet Arcade where he sees this game of Pac-Man in a pizza restaurant, and gets a perfect game and achieves this. He acquires this quest item that nobody else has. That Halliday obviously put there for somebody to find, and it allows him to get an extra life, to get a new chance. So he resurrects. So there's a sacrifice and resurrection theme here. Also sort of just aping Christian theology, but in the context of this story, it's really really cool. Like, wow, okay, so he's not dead. Everybody else gets annihilated by the Uber bomb that the Sixers use, but he gets another life. So Wade finds Artemis's black Chuck Taylors that allow him to fly, and he admits to them all that he needs their help and will split the prize with them. So then he goes into the third gate, and he has to play this game called Tempest. And everybody's helping. His friends are helping them out over the comm links. On page 350, here's a quote. He says, Artemis says, "Hey, check this out," Artemis said, reading from her journal. "The creator of Tempest, Dave Thurer, originally got the idea for the game from a nightmare he had about monsters crawling up out of a hole in the ground and chasing after him." She laughed, her little musical laugh, which I hadn't heard in so long. "Isn't that cool, Z?" she said. "That is cool," I replied. Somehow just hearing her voice set me at ease. I think she knew this, and that was why she kept talking to me. I felt re-energized. I hit the player 1 button again and began my third game. So it's like really, it's just an interesting look at how, a good woman can help a man gain confidence and relax, right? Like when you're going through hard times, she's supporting him, right, emotionally, and giving him confidence and relaxing him, calming him down. And this is sort of a cool little thing, I thought. Anyway, unimportant, but yeah. So a good woman who's there, she's not going to egg you on and betray you and sort of try and spin you out into a state of neuroticism, but she's going to try and calm you down and help you to conquer the game of life, right? So on page 352, Wade beats Tempest and is loaded into a live vid sync of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which I thought was kind of a cool little thing in here in the book, where he's basically doing the same kind of game as he did with War Games, where he has to play the characters and say the lines and go through the movie, and which was just a fun part of the book. And I love the Holy Grail. It's really funny. I know a lot of people don't like it, and it's like cheesy, and they don't get the old British humor, but it's I really like that movie. I liked Monty Python, and especially some of their earlier episodes from Monty Python's Flying Circus. I just thought it was funny, silly humor. Anyway, so page 358. Then I remembered a line from Ogden Morrow's biography: "The opposite sex made Jim extremely nervous, and Kira was the only girl that I ever saw him speak to in a relaxed manner. But even then, it was only in character as Anarok during the course of our gaming sessions, and he would only address her as Lucosia, the name of her D&D character. I rebooted the computer again when the login prompt appeared, and I typed in Lucosia, then I hit the enter key." Uh, so he's in the third gate. He beat Tempest. He beat the Holy Grail game, and now he's in this big room surrounded by consoles, and he needs to type in a console command in order to boot up one of the systems, and the password is Lucosia, which is Morrow's girlfriend's alias. So my note here is Halliday idolized his own best friend's wife. He had the worst case of one-itis ever. It would be cute if it wasn't so pathetic. It even ruined his friendship with Og. A woman in a group of desperate nerds is like a rabbit in a den of starving lions, or a glass of water in a prison cell full of men dying of thirst. Like, it really is kind of funny. Like, and you can see this if you've ever been in a group of nerds, which I have. I was sort of a chameleon in high school, and in school in general. I could hang out with the jocks. I hung out with, the nerds. I hung out with the popular kids, the sporty kids. Um, I loved everybody. I hung out with them all. But I especially loved spending time with the nerds. But you do see this in those groups where there's like one girl, and all of them are sort of like obsessing over this girl, and it can really tear people apart. Um, it can really tear a friend group apart when somebody gets a case of the one-itis and they fall in love, and they become so desperate that they can't they find no possibility in their minds that they could find another woman that would satisfy their needs and be supportive, and to have a life with. This is just it's a really tragic thing, and if you've ever had a relationship, maybe you've experienced this. I know I have, where you're with somebody and you think that they're the only one. They're your soulmate. You couldn't find love anywhere else, and it is a tragic sort of but beautiful time in a young man's life. Where you realize, and you grow out of this juvenile perception of the relationship between man and woman. You know, that this person isn't there for you. Their whole existence doesn't hinge on you. That they have a life and desires and needs and wants, and that that's maybe soulmates don't exist. The person wasn't created to live with you. That maybe they love somebody else. And that's something you have to get over, and live with, and find another person. That it's just an interesting lesson to learn as a young person, and it really, I think it's an important part of growing up and becoming an adult, learning that. That this person that you idolized, that you put before everything else, maybe didn't love you as much, and you have to not give up, but keep trying to find love, with somebody else, and not to idolize them, not to think that they are the whole universe, that you can never find happiness with another person. A very important lesson for young men that I think a lot of people go through. Most young men maybe trying to find love with women. You're going to get into a relationship and think, I love this person so much, I'd do anything for them. They're the most important thing in my life, and um, you really have to build yourself, and be happy with yourself and the things that you're doing, and generate your own life, and things that you do, and be independent before you can ever really find true love with somebody else. Um, Instead of just making your whole life about them. They're never going to love you if you do that, right? Um, you have to have your own things going on, and your own sort of belief in the world, and you have to be solid and put together. Not just a starving simp, crawling after one person, and idolizing them like a god. So anyway, so he beats the final gate, and he meets Halliday's AI ghost, his representation that he left behind when he died. And he's talking to Halliday on page 361. Halliday slid the bookshelf back into place, concealing the button once again. Then he startled me by putting his arm around my shoulders. "Listen," he said. Now this is really important. "Listen," he said in a confidential tone, "I need to tell you one last thing before I go, something I didn't figure out for myself until it was already too late." He led me over to the window and motioned out at the landscape stretching out beyond it. "I created the oasis because I never felt at home in the real world. I didn't know how to connect with the people there. I was afraid for all my life, right up until I knew it was ending. That was when I realized, as terrifying and painful as reality can be, it's also the only place where you can find true happiness, because reality is real. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said, "I think so." "Good," he said, giving me a wink. "Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't hide in here forever." I mean, man, that's really just the central message of the book. If you're going to take anything away from this, I think that is really the big moral lesson here, right? Um, don't hide forever in escapism. Human beings are important. Developing relationships with other people is important in the real world. Don't hide from people because it's scary, because it causes anxiety. They are important, and you need them and they need you. And real life is nothing without other people, right? So um, let's see. So Halliday on page 363, Halliday also said you could wish for whatever you wanted. H said, oh no, so yeah. So on page 363, Halliday also said you could wish for whatever you wanted. H said, "What are you going to wish for first?" I thought about that for a second. Then I tapped the new command icon that now appeared at the edge of my display and said, "I wish for H, Artemis, and Shoto to be resurrected." A dialog window popped up asking me to confirm the spelling of each of their avatar names. Once I did, the system asked me if, in addition to resurrecting their avatars, I wanted to restore all their lost items too. I tapped the yes icon. Then a message appeared in the center of my display. "Resurrection complete. Avatars restored." Right? So it's sort of, this theme of resurrection, where he has now become the God Man and is using his divine powers to resurrect his friends, right? This story of death and resurrection. So page 367. He's finally meeting Artemis, this girl he fell in love with. My heart felt like it was on fire. I took a moment to work up my courage. Then I reached out and took her hand. We sat there for a while, holding hands, reveling in the strange new sensation of actually touching one another. Some time later, she leaned over and kissed me. It felt just like all those songs and poems had promised it would. It felt wonderful, like being struck by lightning. It occurred to me then that for the first time, and as long as I could remember, I had absolutely no desire to log back into Oasis. And that is the last line of the book. A great line, a great resolution to this question, to this conflict, of escapism. He finds the girl. He finds a real girl, and they kiss, and he's, touching her. He's holding hands with her, and he doesn't want to go back into the fake world anymore because he's found a real connection, somebody that he can love. It's and this is why I think I love this book, is because it does answer this question, and it has a satisfying answer to it. And the character, in the end, there's a good, happy ending where he finds love, real human connection, and he essentially realizes that this virtual world that he's been worshiping and escaping into his whole life is a lie. That the real truth in existence and purpose comes from living life with other people and real human connection. We only find ourselves and our true identity through real relationships with other people. Um, Even though we have to, strive to build up our identity and be our own people, this is our relationships with people build us up and inform a lot of who we are, our struggles with people, and it's important. We can't go through life without other people. We can't do it on our own. So yeah, that is the end of the book. That's pretty much the end of the analysis there. I really liked the book. I thought it was a fun adventure story, um, and it has a good message and a good ending. Yeah, and I really liked it. So that's my sort of amateur analysis of Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. A really great book, I thought, and yeah, I haven't seen the movie, but I'm kind of interested in watching it now. You know, hope it doesn't ruin my impression of the book, but yeah. So these these things do kind of stand apart from one another. The text and the film, and we're sort of reading this from our own analysis. A lot of the times, I think the authors, and I'm ripping this off of Bayes Lit Analyzer, but I think a lot of the who you should watch Bayes Lit Analyzer, Bazed Lit Analyzer, wonderful personality on YouTube that does great analysis. He's an actual professor, who really knows how to do this stuff a lot better than I do. But yeah, I thought this was a wonderful little story, and yeah, in a lot of ways, it doesn't matter necessarily what the author thinks about the text, right? But it's what we are reading out of the text and what we can, the patterns we can recognize and the lessons we can learn that aren't always obvious to the author when they're writing them. But yeah, anyway, great book. I really enjoyed it, and that's going to be the end of the stream. If anybody's ever watching this in the future, I hope you enjoyed the analysis. I hope you read this book if you haven't already. And yeah, I think it's important to read books. It's important to read the text. So, all right, this is a fun little one. I think next time I'm going to probably look at the at Bret Easton Ellis's Less Than Zero, which is a far departure from this kind of material. More of a postmodern text, and it's much different. It's not an adventure story like this. It doesn't even really have a plot line. It's Bret Easton Ellis's first novel that he ever wrote at the age of 21, or that he got published anyway. And I'm really excited to do that. It is definitely not as fun, or it doesn't really have an obvious message like this one does, but I am excited to analyze that book just for fun. I'm just doing this as a sort of fun for myself, honestly. It's good to look at these at these books and read into them and try and sort of derive a deeper meaning and just to talk about what we think about them. So yeah. Um, Drop a chat, drop a comment, drop a like, and subscribe. I mostly do video game streams on this channel, but once in a while I'm going to do a book analysis, maybe some film analysis. Even though I'm a total amateur and I don't know a lot, I still think it's fun, and I'm just sort of looking at it from the perspective of a normal guy, who enjoys literature and film. So. All right. Well, have a good night and peace out. Kiss your mom and hug your dad and you know just go and spend time with your family. Go and spend time with your friends and have a beer with real people and have conversations and get out there and be a part of reality. So.